Now, today, we are gonna see, what if Dragon Avtar Naruto took pleasure from small Katara? Part 1. Please subscribe this channel, because definitely I will try my best to provide a valuable content for you all. Also check the description to support the original author for this beautiful creation. A little girl is being carried to her bed as she rests her head on her mom's shoulder. Opening her eyes revealing bright blue eyes, she looked at her mom. "Mommy, come," replied her mother, "can you tell me a bedtime story?" "Which story you want to hear, little one?" asks her mom softly as she looked at her daughter, eyes of the same shade of color as the little girl, and a splitting image of an older version of the little girl, as she set her on the bed. "The story of the first Avatar," said the girl excitedly. Chuckling softly, the mother sat next to her child and closed her eyes, beginning her tale. According to legend, many centuries ago, the four nations were once filled with war and destruction. At a valley where two giant statues stood, giant waterfalls dividing it, two figures were fighting with all their might in trying to slay one another as they used their most powerful attacks in their arsenal, both tired and injured from their clash. Chaos and death ruled over the nations as war kept raging throughout the lands. A raven-haired teen wearing a tattered white long-sleeved shirt which was open at the torso, a family crest of a fan etched on his back. With black pants and a blue cloth hanging from halfway up his stomach to his knees. A purple rope belt around his waist, tied in a bow, his sword drawn as he swung to strike down his foe with vengeance with a loud yell. But one man, whose life was one of pain and misery for housing a powerful being since the day he was born. A blonde teen with whisker-like marks adorning his cheeks was blocking the oncoming sword strike with his black metal arm bracers on his forearms, his upper body cut and bruised from battle, loose. White kung fu pants tattered by the battle he raged against the raven-haired foe. Strode to end the meaningless war that had taken the lives of his loved ones, and mastered the spirit's power by fusing with it his own. Deflecting the sword away from himself, both jumped away each other. The blonde and the raven-haired teen stared at each other defiantly as both refused to bend at each other's will to victory. His power being unmatched when reaching its peak, unleashing it on those who threaten his home. Having no choice but to eliminate the one he once considered a brother, the blonde slowly closed his eyes and searched deep within himself to unleash a power that no one possessed. Like a dragon that he was, gentle and calm as it slept, but when awakened, the dragon becomes fearsome and deadly when threatened. Energy began to dance around him as tattoos slowly began to appear on parts of his body till they became visible, but his most noticeable feature were the four dragons of each element, fire, water, earth and wind, tattooed on his back as they glowed a bright crimson with the rest of his new features. Opening his eyes, the once ocean blue, they were now crimson as blood as he glared at his once brother. Allowing him to bend the very same elements of nature, to a point never thought possible as he used them with his very will. The blonde began to do Tai Chi forms as his body became relaxed and his breathing was controlled. Fluently motions he did with his hands as the water itself began to move towards him, circulating around him as he changed his tempo, but the breathing remained the same. Currents of air came to him, surrounding him like a tornado, mixing with the water as it became ice inside the tornado, with the blonde standing in the middle of the razor-iced typhoon. The raven-haired prepared his final assault as he unleashed a blazing torrent of black flames from his eyes, big enough to destroy a small army, sending it straight at the blonde, in hopes of finally killing him. In order to fight the last remaining threat, seeing the incoming flames, the blonde unleashed his attack as he jumped in the air in a circular motion and landed on his feet with both hands extended forward, sending the typhoon towards his enemy, in hopes of ending it permanently. Both attacks meeting head-on, colliding with each other as the power struggle reached its max, to finally end in a bright flash of light as it exploded, consuming everything in reach. In order to achieve peace and balance in the land, the blonde and the raven-hair warrior still held their stance as the light became brighter and brighter till they were both consumed by the explosion of their attacks. Only for him to disappear without a trace, leaving the world in wonder as to what had happened to him. The valley was left in ruins in the aftermath of the battle the two waged on. But neither of the two were found, both vanishing without a trace. At a village far away from the valley, a woman was giving labor to a child, a healthy boy with tattoos similar to the ones of the blonde glowing faintly as sky blue. With his mysterious death, a new bender of the four elements was born, and thus the Avatar cycle began. A young girl and her brother both stumbled in a circular iceberg, with a person trapped deep within. The girl, using her limited knowledge of waterbending, she broke the dome in half, letting the compressed air to come out, and both peeked inside, surprised to find frozen kid with an arrow on his head, wearing clothes worn by the air nomads. But some refused to believe that the Crimson Avatar had died. My name is Naruto Namikaze, a blonde person wearing white loose kung fu pants with black leather kung fu shoes and black metal leg bracers adorning from the insteps of his feet to halfway his shins. A dark blue sleeveless vest covered his upper body, and both forearms were adorned with black metal bracers on each forearm. Introduced himself as he extended his hand forward for a handshake to a light brown-skinned girl with bright blue eyes. My name is Katara. The young girl, who looked around 16 or 17, replied back shyly as she shook hands with him and noticed how handsome the young man looked, but saw that he held a lot of pain and loneliness in his eyes. Some believed that he had gone into a deep meditative sleep, only to awaken when he was needed once again. This is a surprise. I would have never thought I would meet the Crimson Avatar after 3,000 years, the spirit of the library exclaimed with mild surprise. Crimson Avatar. Katara thought to herself in shock as she processed what the owl spirit had said, confusing Sokka and Aang since they didn't know what was so special about it. Naruto, why did he call you the Crimson Avatar, when it was said he lived 3,000 years ago? Katara asked the blonde as they stared at each other's eyes, hoping the blonde would clarify the spirit's claim. Closing his eyes, sighing, Naruto answered her question. He calls me by one of the titles given, because I was there 3,000 years ago. I was the one who brought balance to the world. In order for once again, protect the four nations from the wielder of the darkness flames. Underneath the hidden caverns of Ba Sing Se, Naruto stared in disbelief at the person he thought he would never in his wildest imagination see ever again, to suddenly scowl in rage as he let his power loose, his tattoos glowing their crimson glow. Sasuke, it has been a long time since our last battle, hasn't it? Avatar of the Four Dragons. Sasuke said emotionlessly as he stared passively at the blonde. Dark flames being let loose around him, circulating him in a pillar of flames as they both got ready to settle the score. Sasuke, almost drained out of energy, gathered the last of his remaining strength into his right, black electricity cackling, running towards his enemy as called out his attack. One last time, Naruto feeling exhausted and drained from battle, he focused on the palm of his right hand a small sphere, making grow larger and larger as he added the wind element into his attack, a loud whistling noise being heard as its form was completed in the form of a giant shuriken and rushed towards his foe, shouting his attack. Futun. Rasen Shuriken, Chidri Nagashi, once and for all. But alas, no one knows what exactly had happened to him or to where his whereabouts are, but one thing is for certain, he was never forgotten, for by the mere mention of his title, the leaders of the four nations never dared to disturb the balance of the lands, for they didn't want to awaken him and invoke his wrath, until now. Kya finished her story as she opened her eyes and saw that her daughter had fallen asleep as she snored softly in her pillow. Smiling softly, the mother slowly stood up, so she wouldn't awaken her, and pulled the covers over her, causing the little girl to snuggle deeper in her covers. "Good night, Katara, my little waterbender," said Kya as she leaned forward and gave her daughter a soft kiss on the forehead, turned off the light candles, causing the room to go dark as she walked out of the room. End cut. This is a trailer of what I have been cooking up in my mind, Naruto. Avatar. The Last Airbender X over. Review and tell me what you think. Thank you and out. Notes. The tattoos. The tattoos I was referring to were the ones that appeared on Yu Yu Hakusho when Yusuke turns into a Mizuko. The four dragon tattoo is my original idea. The attire. The choice of clothing I decided to give Naruto was the one that Super Majin Buu wore from the DBZ Majin Buu Saga. Book 1 Prologue Disclaimers. I don't own Naruto or Avatar, The Last Airbender. Prologue. Tale of a legend deep within a library, hidden from the world as it sat underneath the sands of the Earth Kingdom. A man sat in a desk, with a vast of scrolls laying around the table and the walls, looking for any mean to help him defeat and conquer his enemies, but unfortunately, all of his efforts were in vain, and in frustration, he tossed the scrolls aside. Arghh, useless scrolls. None of them contain any important information on the other nations, yelled the man as he stood up and tore his hand through his hair in frustration, and was about to walk away, till out of the corner of his eye, he saw a scroll, resting between the teeth of a carved-shaped dragon's head, the insignia of the 4 elements marked at each different corner in a quadrilateral shape. Curiosity gaining the best of him, the man walked towards the carving and slowly reached for the scroll. Seeing that nothing had happened when he touched it, he began to pull the scroll in attempts to break it free of its confine, but just as he pulled, the dragon's head clicked, making him get cautious, but the dragon only dropped its lower jaw, releasing the scroll. The man backed away from the dragon's carving, and sat down at the chair he used, and slowly unrolled the scroll, reading its contents in it, only to read a legend of old. Legend of the Avatar of the 4 dragons long before the Avatar came to existence. And the knowledge of bending the elements became a way of life. The rule of the shinobi dictated over the nations, waging war through the continents as they strived to conquer each other, leaving death and destruction in its wake, innocent lives lost in its aftermath. But one child, who was chosen to jail a mighty spirit beast, scorned and hated, terrorized and beaten, stepped forward and strode to end the wars, fusing his life energy with the spirit bound within him, gained the abilities to control the elements themselves by will, and unleashed it onto the world. Like a dragon soaring through the lands, defeating every threat in his path. His power unmatched by no one, as the marks of his body glow red, 4 dragons marking on his back, brought peace to the world. Despite the power he contained, he was still human and sought to pass his knowledge to 4 disciples, teaching them the fighting arts he created for each element, bringing balance as he divided his knowledge. Sadly, the peace was disrupted once again, as the wielder of the dark flames came, seeking to destroy with his flames of vengeance, only to clash with the dragon himself. Long and hard they fought, to only disappear in the end without a trace, and with the death of the Crimson Avatar. A new master of the elements was born. Thus, the cycle of the Avatar came to be taught by the disciples of the first Avatar. The new Avatar learned to master the elements, maintaining the peace and balance for generations to come, only to disappear once again, in the world's time of need. Foretold, it has been, one day the Avatar of the 4 dragons shall awaken once again, to light the courage of those who lost hope, to unite the people to fight for peace, and rectify the wrongs of the lands, by defeating the same evil that fought him long ago, and once again, bring order to the world. Finishing reading what the scroll contained, the man scoffed, and threw the paper across the room as it landed with a clank as he picked up the torch and walked out of the room, to do more research on finding any weaknesses on the nations his nation waged war against. The scroll laid there on the floor, underneath where the dragon's head was mounted. If the man had not turned around and left, he would have noticed the rumbling of the dragon's jaw as it closed, and its eyes giving a crimson glow within the darkness, lighting the room softly till they finally died and darkness consumed it all. Book 1 Chapter 1 Welcome to tonight's entertainment. This is the opening chapter of the story, so sit back and relax, and hopefully you enjoy the show. Explanation at the end of the chapter every time this is posted. Disclaimers. I don't own Naruto or Avatar, The Last Airbender. Beginning of a cycle. The dragon lays to rest. Clashing of thunder and trembles of the earth, hurricane winds and the eruption of black and white flames were seen coming from the mouth of the valley, as a fierce battle took place. Far from the distance of the battle, 4 figures were running at high speeds through the forest, in hopes of catching with their comrade, only to stop just as a tremor shot across the lands and felt a rise of power. Across the distance, the four saw a crimson beam of light going upwards, as if it was reaching towards the heavens. "His power sure is intimidating," muttered a young man with spiky brown hair, the symbol of fire sage etched in the back of his red robe as he stared at the beam of light. "Yea, it is," whispered a young woman that has orange hair tied up, with red elastics, into two very large pigtails. Her robes were orange, brown with the symbol of air sage on her back. A teen with unfocused colorless eyes *, and short light brown hair adoring a golden-colored robe with the symbol of earth sage on his robe just nodded his head, worried for his master as he was fighting a powerful enemy that wished their destruction. And lastly, a teen near him wearing a light blue robe with the symbol of water with black hair kept staring, mesmerized at the power and strength that his teacher held. The crimson light show could be seen all over the elemental nations. "Konohamaru, Moegi, Udon, let's go. The faster we get there, the faster we can help him," exclaimed the blue-robed teen as the rest of the teens just nodded their heads and they continued to rush towards the valley. Moments before the light beam shot through the sky, two giant statues stood beside the giant waterfall within the valley itself. The sounds of grunting and yelling echoed through the valley along the sounds metal clashing as two figures were fighting it out. A raven-haired teen with blood dripping from his mouth, the side of his head and eyes, wore a tattered and bloodied white long-sleeved shirt, which was open at the torso, a family crest of a fan etched on his back, with black pants and a blue cloth hanging from halfway up his stomach to his knees. A purple rope belt around his waist, tied in a bow, his sword drawn as he swung to strike down his foe with vengeance with a loud yell as he brought his sword down towards his target. Die. A blonde teen wearing tattooed loose white kung fu pants with black battle shoes, his upper body cut and bruised from battle, whisker-like marks adorning his cheeks, kept dodging left and right, ducking right underneath it as he evaded the slashes of the sword, but still kept getting cut in the process as the blade managed to reach his skin a few times. Then his enemy jumped in the air for an overhead slash with both hands on the hilt, but he quickly managed to intercept by extending his left arm forward, catching the downward strike by placing his hand on the wrists with an opened palm, and stood his ground firm and fearless, getting in a horse stance as he reared his fist and shot it forward, turning his body as one unit, moving his right leg in front of his left leg for a stronger strike, the fist finding its mark in his opponent's chest, sending the raven-haired teen back crashing onto the rocky terrain of the valley, causing a small avalanche as rocks landed on top of him. Watching the rubble of rocks falling down, the blonde warrior relaxed his guard a little as he couldn't feel any movement on the ground, but to relax a little was dangerous in a place of battle, as he soon learned as the raven-haired teen he had sent towards the rocks jumped out of the ground from behind, causing the blonde to turn around in surprise as the swordsman brought his sword down with the intent of cutting him in half, only to find the blonde to counter defense by blocking the oncoming sword strike with his black metal arm bracers on his forearms, using his physical strength to try and push the swordsman off of him, but was struggling as the raven-haired teen overpowered him and slowly brought the blade down towards the blonde's face. Seeing that the blade was getting closer and closer, he shifted his feet closer and fire began to sprout from the plant of his feet. Using his body, the elemental bender pushed off the blade and sent a rising flaming kick, aiming for the chin, but the swordsman saw what his opponent was trying to do and managed to jump away unharmed a few feet back, away from him as he landed on top of a small hill, glaring down at the blonde as he landed on the hill across from him, black onyx eyes glaring spitefully at ocean blue eyes. "Surrender, Sasuke. I don't wish to fight you in a pitiless battle, but I cannot allow you harm the people of the village," said the blonde teen as he stared passively at the teen now identified known as Sasuke. Sasuke began to chuckle and slowly the laughter began to get louder and louder as he finally let out a madman's laughter, calming down with a crazed look in his eyes. "You must be more delusional than I thought, Naruto," said the Uchiha as he sneered at Naruto as said blonde narrowed his eyes at the raven-haired teen as he began to close his eyes. "If you think I'm just going to turn myself in and take it laying down to what that forsaken village did to my clan and accept my fate, They wouldn't be nothing, if weren't for the might of the Uchiha clan, finished the Uchiha darkly as he reopened his eyes, and his eye color had changed to blood color eyes with intersecting eclipses. The blonde just stood quiet, knowing full well what the advisors of the village council and the Sandaime himself did by ordering the complete annihilation of the Uchiha clan at the hands of his older brother, Itachi Uchiha, since they were planning a coup d'état by trying to overthrow and kill the Sandaime Hokage along with the clan heads that formed majority of the council and take control of Konohagakure no Sato. You got your revenge when you killed Danzo, Kaharu and Homura. There's no point for you to spill the lives of the innocent, retorted Naruto as he tried to reason with the ludicrous Uchiha. My revenge isn't complete since I didn't get kill the one who authorized it, but destroying the village of Konoha and her people should be an equivalent substitute for the genocide of my clan, was the Uchiha's crazed response as he gained a dark crazed look in his eyes, along with your wife and unborn child. Naruto narrowed his eyes dangerously at the Uchiha's threat, but he just took a deep breath and let out a sigh as he closed his eyes. I see, then you leave me with no other alternative, said Naruto as he began to concentrate on unleashing his real strength, affecting the forces of nature around him as the air began to breeze rapidly. Waves of water began to crash around the rocks of valley wildly as a large spider web crack appeared on the earth. An outline of red energy began to sprout out of Naruto's body, circulating him all over his persona as small tattoos began to appear on some parts of his upper body, barely visible to the naked eye. Sasuke was looking astonished as he finally gets to see the power that his former teammate had gained and used in order to defeat and kill his ancestor, Madara Uchiha, and ending the Fourth Great Ninja War, bringing glorious peace to the elemental nations. Not wanting for Naruto to get the upper hand by overpowering him, the Uchiha sprung into action by tearing into hand signs at blinding speed, and took a deep breath as he finished the hand sign sequence on the tiger seal and shouted his technique. Kaiten. Ryuka no Jutsu. A stream of dark fire originated from his mouth as it rushed towards the powering blonde, hitting him dead on as the flames impacted and formed a giant tower of fire, engulfing him completely. Sasuke smirked with satisfaction as he thought that the blonde had been killed, since nothing on this world could have survived a direct hit from the intense heat of his flames that he had obtained after he achieved total control over the Amaterasu. But his smirk soon turned into a scowl as he saw that the blonde had survived as a beam of red light shot towards the skies, forcefully dispersing the pillar of fire as it revealed Naruto. His eyes still closed, unharmed and floating a good 15 feet of the ground as the tattoos had now become fully visible. A double-headed arrow on his chest with two small lines going downward on the sides of his pectorals, a circle on each shoulder with scoop underneath it, a spiral tattoo on each forearm, starting from his wrist to halfway up his forearm, all glowing a bright crimson, but his most noticeable tattoo of them all was the one on his back, 4 dragons of each element, fire, water, earth and wind, glowing on his back, tangled with one another as if they were reaching for the heavens. The blonde's eyes that were closed had now shot open. Eyes that once had a nice shade of ocean blue were now portraying slitted eyes with red irises, and spoke with a deeper, almost demonic voice. Sasuke Uchiha. You and your forefathers have disrupted the peace of this world for far too long. It's time that I rectify a mistake that your late brother committed when he spared you, stated Naruto as he landed on the ground and stood in the praying mantis stance, with his right leg forward as he leaned back all of his body weight into his left leg, both elbows separated an inch away from the abdomen with the forearms placed forward with wrists bent upward making the fingers point up, and waited for the Uchiha to make his move as he closed his eyes and used the vibration of the ground to see. You think you can kill me? Shouted Sasuke, enraged at the calmly tone that the blonde had said, as if he wasn't a threat to him. I'll show you Dobi, that no matter what power you possess or whose line you came from, you'll always be beneath me, an Uchiha, thought the Uchiha sinisterly as he prepared to use his most powerful fire attack, blood dripping from the corner of his eyes as he summoned the dark flames of Amaterasu, forming an ember at the palm of his hands, growing bigger and bigger till both hands were engulfed in flames. The blonde saw what the Uchiha was trying to do and changed his stance from the praying mantis to Tai Chi as he began to do its forms. His body became relaxed and his breathing became controlled. Fluently motions he did with his hands as he waved them around in the air, causing the water within the valley to move towards him, circulating around him as he changed his tempo, but the breathing remained the same as he now began to move his whole upper body in a circular motion while moving his hands in the same rhythm. Gusts of wind began to pick up around him, surrounding him like a tornado as it mixed with the water, turning it to ice inside the air torrent, with the blonde standing in the middle of the razor-iced typhoon, ready to permanently strike down the person that he once considered a brother. The unidentified teen along with the once Konohamaru Corps kept running at high speeds, the valley coming into view as they got closer and closer, feeling the winds getting stronger as they reached their destination, debris flying in their direction in the process. Inari. Konohamaru. Look, we're close to the valley, shouted Moegi to her teammates while Udon, having a better sense of feeling of the terrain, he felt large pieces of broken trees coming in their direction, and yelled out a warning. Incoming. Both Inari and Konohamaru looked up ahead and saw many broken trees were flying in their direction, and noticed that one of the larger chunks of wood was about to hit them, but Moegi reacted by jumping into the air and passed between them, twisting her body in the air to deliver a spinning kick. Compressed air shot from her foot as she sent the broken pieces of trees and everything that came in their direction away from the two into the distance as the three landed in the ground panting a bit. Thanks Moegi, said Konohamaru as Inari just nodded his head. Grinning a bit, she turned to her elemental brothers, and decided to tease him a bit. No problem Kono-chan. Don't call me that, whined Konohamaru as Inari and Udon just chuckled a bit, but when Inari saw that most of the debris caused by Moegi blocked their path, he voiced his opinion. Damn, we're going to have to around this and it'll take us longer to reach the valley, cursed Inari. Leave it to me, replied Udon as he stepped forward ahead of the group and firmly placed both his feet into the ground, placed both elbows a little bit away from his stomach and raised his hands with his palms open facing down, to suddenly brought them down forward, as if he was pushing a boulder, only to cause a giant dirt cloud to form as the earth parted, pushing all that blocked their path. Once the cloud cleared, a cleared path stood right in front of them. Nice going Udon, now let's go, ordered Konohamaru as they once again ran towards the valley. Back the valley, the battle was about to reach its climax as Sasuke reared his hands back as he crazily shouted at the blonde. You're right. One of us is going to die Naruto, but it's not going to be me, Amaterasu. Shot both his hands forward, launching a giant stream of fire at the blonde. With a twist of his upper body, Naruto moved in a circle as he waved his hands in a circular motion, only to stop as he shot his right hand forward with an open palm, sending the typhoon straight into the flames. Both streams met head-on as they collided with one another, both fighters focused on overpowering each other's attack, but neither one getting the upper hand as they both continued to struggle. Naruto saw that the elements began to mix and knew that if this continued, their attacks would reach their breaking point and cause a giant explosion, most likely severely injure or kill both of them, but that was a risk he was willing to take. Twisting his foot a little, he ordered the earth to get a hold of Sasuke as the earth itself reached up and clamped into his legs, not giving him a chance to escape. What? Shouted Sasuke in surprise as he looked down at his legs and saw he was being held in place. Naruto pushed even further, sending more currents of air into the fire, making the struggle of the elements to reach their max as it formed a giant sphere of energy, growing bigger and bigger by minute till it finally couldn't hold it anymore and began to glow a bright light till it exploded, engulfing Sasuke and Naruto in the process as they both stood firm on their ground, or trapped in the Uchiha's case. The four sages finally reached their destination as they landed at top of the mouth of the valley only to find a giant explosion in its wake. Udon realizing the danger they were in, he jumped in front of the group and got into a solid horse stance, shot his forearms forward in a defensive position as he commanded the earth to build a giant wall in front of them, protecting them from destruction as Udon began to sweat profusely by maintaining the wall from collapsing from the sheer force of the explosion. As the explosion occurred, Naruto bended the earth to build a massive shield, but at point blank, the force of the explosion was so great, it obliterated the wall and hit Naruto directly, injuring him severely as he was sent dashing through the boulders and into the water, slowly sinking into the depths. Using the last bit of his strength before he lost consciousness, the blonde clashed both of his fists together and caused a tornado to form underwater, and tried to separate the water, but it backfired as the water itself began to freeze around him, and due to his injuries, the blonde couldn't hold the tornado for long as he began to slip into consciousness. But before his world went black, one person was on his mind and let out a sad smile. "Forgive me 10-10, for I wasn't able to keep my promise," thought Naruto regretfully as he closed his eyes and finally lost consciousness within the ice pillar, putting his body in a hibernating healing state, and his ice chamber slowly sinking into darkness of the lake. The shield that Udon made slowly crumbled back to the ground as the four took a look at what remained of the valley. The statues that once portrayed the founders of Konoha were nothing more than just rubble, as a few parts only remained. A giant crater was created. Where the explosion took place, the water was still held back by an unknown force till it finally came crashing down the crater, the waves roaring as it filled the gap on the ground. "Unbelievable," said an astonished Inari. "Yay, but where is he? I don't see him anywhere," said a concerned Moegi as she kept looking for their master as she walked a few steps forward. "Let's split up and look, we'll cover more ground this way," suggested Udon as he looked at his friends, who just nodded an affirmative at the idea. But before they began to mobilize, they all heard a groaning of pain coming from a couple of feet away from their location. A hand sprouting from the rubble as the person tried to dig himself out. "There he is, Naruto!" Moegi shouted in relief as she rushed ahead with the three following behind her. Once she was in reach, she saw who it was that crawled out of the rocks and made a sudden stop as she stared in shock as to who it was. Konohamaru, Udon and Inari catching up with her. "Moegi, what's wrong? Why you stop?" asked Inari as he, Udon and Konohamaru saw her look in disbelief, turning to see what she was looking at that got her in this state, only to be surprised themselves as they saw that it was none other than Sasuke Uchiha. "Uchiha," growled Inari as he sprung forward and waved his hands upward, causing the water to crash into Sasuke against the wall, freezing him in place, leaving his head the only part of his body unfrozen, causing the Uchiha to cough blood on the ice due to his ribs being damaged even further. "Where is Naruto, you bastard?" demanded Konohamaru, only for Sasuke to chuckle darkly at the teens as he lifted his head up and looked directly into their eyes. "I killed him, he wasn't strong enough to defeat me," responded the Uchiha, causing the guys to growl dangerously as they held their anger while Moegi held her hand atop of her mouth in shock. "You're lying," shouted Moegi with tears developing at the corner of her eyes. "Heh. Am I now? Then pray tell why I'm the one still alive while your precious master is dead at the bottom of the lake," sneered Sasuke as he led a cold laughter only for Inari to get angered even more and silenced him by freezing him completely. Udon raised his arm upwrd with his fingers pointing straight, cutting the earth where the Uchiha was being held in place and letting it fall into the water, where it began sink. Meanwhile Konohamaru held a crying Moegi, as she mourned the loss of their friend, brother, and teacher. "Let's go, we have to report to Lady Tsunade," muttered a saddened Konohamaru as the two somberly nodded their heads while Moegi still cried in Konohamaru's chest, tears slowly falling out of their eyes as they bowed their heads in silent respect before they headed back to the village. Meanwhile, back in the hospital of Konohagakure no Sato, there was a big group of people in the waiting room as they patiently waited for news of their friend, who was giving birth to the son of a certain knuckle-headed Avtar, who has yet to return with victory over the traitorous Uchiha, causing some to get worried. "Damn it. Where is that stupid blonde? He should be here to see his son being born," exclaimed a Chunin with spiky brown hair and black slitted eyes as he sat next to his companion, a giant wolf-like dog, as he barked in agreement. "Mendokus, you know who that troublesome blonde is fighting against. Naruto cannot afford to take it lightly against him," a Jonin with a pineapple hairstyle reminded to his comrade. "But still, Shikamaru, it has been almost 3 hours since we last felt that massive rise of chakra die out and saw that bright flash of light," A Jonin with smooth black hair and pale lavender eyes gave his 2 cents as he voiced his opinion, causing some of the rookie 9 to look down in concern, but a blonde young woman decided to speak. Look, this is Naruto we're talking about. He's too stubborn to lose to Sasuke, much less to die and leave his family behind. So stop thinking like he's going to die and let us wait for his return. For right now 10-10 is our concern since she's still in the delivery room, said Ino as she turned her head back towards the doors of the delivery room. Inside the room was a woman with brown hair tied in 2 buns was lying in bed with her legs open, panting with sweat pouring down her face as she went into labor, taking deep breaths as instructed by the nurse delivering the baby. You're doing great 10-10. Just keep taking deep breaths and push, I can see the head coming, encouraged a fair-skinned lady with brown eyes. Her long, blonde hair tied into 2 ponytails except for her bangs, which are parted in the middle and fall down the sides of her face. Her forehead adorned a violet rhombus. Her clothing consisting of a gray, kimono-style blouse with no sleeves, held closed by a broad, dark bluish-gray obi that matches her trousers. The blouse is closed quite low, as it revealed her sizable cleavage. A shoulder-length dark-haired girl with bangs and dark eyes wearing a long bluish-black kimono with white trimmings except for on the sleeves held closed by a white obi was monitoring 10-10 as she kept wiping the sweat of her face. Keep pushing 10-10, the head is already out, stated Shizune as she saw that Tsunade was carefully pulling the baby out of the womb, while 10-10 still screamed in pain as she pushed. I'm going to fucking castrate that bastard with a rusted knife as soon as I see that fucking blonde. Screamed a hormonal 10-10, scaring Shizune a bit. If Sasuke didn't kill him, I'm sure his wife will, thought Shizune, not knowing how true her thoughts were about the blonde's demise. The wails of a baby suddenly filled the room, as Tsunade held a baby boy. 10-10, with teary eyes, stared at her newborn son, happiness filling her whole being as she tried to reach for her baby. Tsunade slowly and carefully placed the baby in her mother's arms and watched tenderly as to how the mother brought the baby closely to her chest, silently crying in happiness as she held her baby. Then she looked towards Tsunade. Lady Tsunade, has Naruto returned yet? Asked 10-10 hopefully, hoping that her husband was on other side of the doors, waiting to come in and see his son, but was only disappointed when Tsunade just looked down and sadly shook her head. Have you thought of a name for the baby yet, 10-10? Asked a pink-haired nurse with green eyes, wearing the usual nurse uniform as she had helped Tsunade Shishio to deliver Naruto's baby, hoping to brighten the mood. Smiling softly, she looked at the little bundle of joy she held in her arms. The weapon mistress simply said, Raizen. Suddenly, a glow began to emit from the baby, surprising everyone in the room as 10-10 held out her son, worried that something was happening to her baby, but to her shock and everyone else's, the glow came from the same shape of tattoos that his father had, minus the whisker marks on his cheeks, till they finally stopped glowing and stayed visible for a few seconds till they had completely disappeared. Looks like we have a second coming of the Gaki, joked the Hokage as everyone else shared a laugh, except 10-10, for she could not shake the feeling of dread that began to build up in her chest as she stared at her sleeping son and pulled him back to her chest, holding him tightly. Please Naruto, be all right, thought the weapon mistress as she looked out the window. At the front of the gates, the 4 benders arrived solemnly as they still couldn't believe that the blonde was dead as they kept walking past the gates. The young Sarutobi stopped on his tracks, causing the rest to look at him, wondering what was going through his mind as he had been quiet all the way back to the village. You guys head towards the Hokage Tower, I'll gather the Rookie 9 along with Bro's wife and meet you guys back there, said Konohamaru as he disappeared in a whirl of flames, heading towards the hospital as he left the rest of his team to do as they were told, since there was nothing left to do. Appearing in front of the hospital, the young fire sage walked into the building and began to look around for Sakura, knowing well that she was in charge of the hospital in Tsunade's absence due to her Hokage duties, so she could help him gather everyone at the tower, but just as he made a turn, Konohamaru ran into Hanabi as she walked without paying attention and crashed into him, landing flat on her ass. Watch where you're going, you idiot, ranted the young heiress, but stopped once she saw that had ran into Konohamaru. Jumping to her feet, she ran into his arms, hugging each other tightly for a second till they parted lightly from the hug. When you got back, Kono-kun? I missed you, said the young Hyuga as she looked into his eyes, her happiness replaced with concern as she saw the sadness in his eyes. What happened, Konohamaru? Whispered Hanabi as she placed her hand on his cheek. Konohamaru reached for her hand and gently gave it a squeeze, letting out a sigh. He looked at his girlfriend with tired eyes. Hana-chan, do you know where I can find the Rocky Nine? Asked the young firebender, completely ignoring her question. Nodding her head slowly, she nudged with her head towards the delivery room down the hall. There in the delivery room, celebrating with Naruto-sama's wife and the newborn, was Hanabi's response as Konohamaru gained a surprised look in his face, thinking he heard wrong, thinking that 1010 wasn't due till a couple more days. She already had the baby? Hanabi nodded her head. Yes, she went into labor earlier than expected. She gave birth to a boy, looking like a mini Naruto, minus the whisker marks and having his mother's hair color instead of blonde with darker shade of blue in his eyes. But the most shocking surprise of all was the glowing tattoos that looked identical to Naruto's, glowing light blue instead of crimson though. At this revelation, Konohamaru's eyes widened in shock. He didn't think it was possible for Naruto's power to be passed down through his kid. If Naruto's son gained his father's power, then that means, thought Konohamaru before he was brought out of his musing by Hanabi. Konohamaru, what's going on? Asked Hanabi worriedly, only to be grabbed on the shoulders by Konohamaru. Hanabi, go to the Hokage Tower and go get the rest of my team. Tell them exactly what you said about Bro's baby, K? The fire sage said urgently, making the young heiress nod her head rapidly and dashed out of the hospital as soon as her boyfriend let go of her, heading straight to the tower, leaving Konohamaru alone in the corridor as he began to walk towards the doors and stopping with his hand on the handle, not looking forward to the news he was about to bring. Taking a deep breath, the young Sarutobi walked inside. Everyone in the Rookie Nine was rejoicing and laughing, as they celebrated and congratulated the weapon mistress. The girls ogling the baby as they each tried to hold him, squealing like little girls at the cuteness of the baby, while the guys just talked and claimed how he would grow strong and fearless like his father, only to be interrupted as the doors were opened and saw the grandson of the Sandaime walking in. The feeling in the room began to slightly change as some were feeling uneasy. Greetings, Hokage-sama. I come to report to you on our mission, aiding Naruto Namikaze in his battle against Sasuke Uchiha, said Konohamaru as he kneeled down in front of everyone, but right in front of his leader, not daring to look up into the eyes of his late teacher's wife. Brief me later, Konohamaru, for right now that idiotic blonde needs to get his ass here and greet his son, said Tsunade dismissively as she waved her hand non-caringly, but Konohamaru wouldn't have any of it. I'm afraid that I must insist, for it is urgent, Konohamaru retorted back as he stood up and looked directly in the Godaime's eyes. Seeing the seriousness of Naruto's pupil, Tsunade put her poker face on and crossed her arms under her massive breasts, glaring with intensity back into his eyes, demanding an explanation from him, only to be interrupted by someone. Konohamaru-kun, did Naruto return with you? Asked Tenten from her bed, as she looked at him with worried eyes. Yes. Where is Naruto-kun? Konohamaru? A young woman that sat near Tenten on her bed. Long blue, purplish hair with lavender eyes staring at him, her resemblance to his girlfriend being uncanny. Only difference was she was older by a few years. Yosh. Naruto-kun should be here so he can shine his sun with his flames of youth, screamed a guy in tight green jumpsuit and orange leg warmers, huge eyebrows with a bowl haircut as he pumped his fist into the air. Lee. No shouting in the hospital, yelled Sakura as she bonked Lee in the head. But all fell to deaf ears as Konohamaru kept his silence, hesitating to answer but kept still keeping his cool. A young man wearing his jacket hanging down to his knees, his hood obstructing his face adorning a satchel on his back, noticed the young bender's body tensing up, and narrowed his eyes at him. There's something you're not telling us, said the hooded teen. I'll answer all of your questions, but first we must wait for the others to arrive, said the firebender firmly. Kiba was about to ask who he was referring to, but his answer was answered as a giant puff of smoke appeared in the room, revealing the rest of Konohamaru's teammates, wearing unreadable expressions as the smoke cleared, with Hanabi in tow. Alright brat, cut the bullshit. What hell is going on and where is Naruto? Ordered Tsunade as her patience was running thin, tired of beating around the bush. Taking a deep breath, the young Sarutobi started to speak. Naruto is dead, killed by Sasuke Uchiha at the Valley of the End. And the whole room became deadly silent as Konohamaru dropped the bomb on them, the news slowly sinking in, shaking everyone to the very core, but his wife, taking it the hardest as she just sat there, shell-shocked in place with a stricken look in her face. No, 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 please tell me that it's not true. Please tell me he is just playing a sick joke on us, pleaded Ten as cried desperately. Her tears dripped down her cheeks as she got out of the bed, despite that she had gone through labor almost few minutes ago and walked right up to Konohamaru, gripping him by the robe as she shook him back and forth. You better be lying, Sarutobi, growled the Hokage menacingly as she released her killer intent at the fire user. Konohamaru, please, tell me he isn't dead, cried the weapon mistress only for the four of them to lower their heads in silence. It's true. Sasuke confirmed it when we confronted him, Moegi whispered softly as she closed her eyes. Falling to her knees, she cried in her hands as everyone watched in sorrow at the now widow. Tsunade sat in a chair in disbelief, her heart aching as she lost another member of her family, tears silently falling down as her body began to feel numb, staring into the wall. Shikamaru held Ino as she cried in his chest, along with Hinata as she cried in the arms of her cousin, Neji. Kiba, Choji and Shino just sat quiet in the back of the room with their eyes shut, sobbing quietly as they mourned their fallen friend. Turning his attention back to the group, Shikamaru asked them a question that had everyone's attention. What happened to Sasuke? Inari was the one who responded. I froze him, leaving his head free, to interrogate him what he had done to Naruto-sensei, but he gloated. How he had killed him and froze him completely. Udon crumbled the earth beneath him, sending him sinking into the depths of the valley. Konohamaru then kneeled down and placed his hands on her shoulders, making Ten look into his eyes. Ten, I have a request, started Konohamaru. I want to teach Naruto's son firebending when he comes of age. I want to give his son his legacy, he finished saying, shocking everyone in the room. I'll teach him waterbending, volunteered Inari. I'll teach him earthbending, Udon said next as he stepped forward next to Udon. And I'll teach airbending, Moegi said lastly as she stood in between Udon and Inari. How do you know that he's going to be able to use all four styles? Naruto's power was unique. We don't know much about it except that he got it after he merged his power with the Kyubis. Hell, we don't even know if the boy inherited the same power as well, exclaimed Shikamaru as he voiced out his opinions, but the answer to his questions were answered by the Hokage. Naruto's son did inherit his father's bloodline, for right after he was born, the same tattoos that appeared on Naruto's body when he used his power appeared on the little brat's body, but only for few seconds till they disappeared, explained the busty Hokage. We believe that with Naruto's passing, the essence that resided in him was passed down to his son, making him the second avatar, stated Udon as he crossed his arms across his chest and closed his eyes and stopped to gather his thoughts. But we also theorize that the essence will retain some knowledge of the person's previous life, and also become a cycle itself. How do you figure this? Asked Neji, curious at the earthbender's theory. Naruto once told us that he felt the power he gained had a consciousness of itself, guiding him when he went into the avatar state as he used the four elements without clashing with each other. As for the theory of becoming a cycle, take Naruto himself for example. His main element was wind as he mastered it faster out of the three, then water and earth, and lastly fire, having being the most difficult for him to master, explained Konohamaru this time, looking at the crowd in front of him. So you're saying that the cycle would start with wind, that being Naruto to his son, which would be what element? Kept asking Neji. The next element would be water, replied Udon as he lowered his head, since it would make sense at the order that Naruto learned the elements. Everyone contemplated at what was being said, but still couldn't believe that the blonde was gone from their lives. Konohamaru, not seeing the baby, walked up to the crib and peered inside, finding the little baby fast asleep as he softly snored, and smiled sadly, thinking of how he would grow up without a father, just like Asuma's son. The rest of the benders walked up to the crib, seeing the newborn for the first time, could NT help but smile at the innocence of the baby. Moegi reached with her hand and gently caressed the baby's cheek. "What's his name?" asked Moegi, looking into Tenten's direction as she looked up from the crib. Wiping her tears with hands, the weapon mistress replied, "His name is Raizen Namikaze." "Raizen, huh?" muttered a pensive Konohamaru as he kept staring at the baby. "I'm sorry for not making it on time to save your father, little one," thought Konohamaru as he placed his finger in the baby's hand, being grasped by the baby as he slept. "We both lost something. We lost a great man that was a friend, a brother, a husband, a mentor and a leader, but I promise you, I'll train to be the man that your father would be proud of. Naruto may be gone, but he won't be forgotten as a piece of him lives within you," thought Inari as he looked over Konohamaru's shoulder, "guiding you as you grow." Moegi reached into the crib and gently picked up little Raizen into her arms, cuddling it close to her chest. Udon stood on her right as he placed an arm around her, reaching with his fingertips to feel the features of the baby. On her left, Nohamaru stood while Inari was standing right beside Udon, the four of them staring at the baby, and said infant began to slowly open his eyes, a soft glow emitting in them. The view slowly began to drift from them and out the window as it rose over the village and into the skies. The cycle of time passing by as day became night, and night became day, the seasons coming and going as the terrain changed with time, and the age of the shinobi began to slowly die since they were no longer needed in times of peace as the Avatar maintained the balance within the four nations. The elemental nations went through drastic changes as the disciples of the Crimson Avatar taught the ways of bending to the people, forming new ways of life that would last through the centuries. The 5 main villages would be divided and in their place 4 nations named after the element they were taught would take their place. The Earth Nation residing in the east taking a vast majority of land, the Fire Nation located at the western volcanic islands of the oceans, the waterbenders went their separate routes. As some went north and south, thus creating the northern and southern tribes. The airbenders migrated into the 3 highest mountains of the world, creating their civilization detached from the rest of the world. Everyone was enjoying the peace and harmony they have had for the past 10,000 years, as they lived in prosperity, but sadly, everything doesn't last forever as war was rising at the horizon. History was about to be made that would shock the nations to their foundation in the years to come, and this, my friends, is where the tale truly begins. The view fast forwards into distance as it reached the place where the Valley of the End was once located, but instead of what was left over of the 2 statues that stood aside of the waterfall, a large body of water had overflown the valley through the years as an island floated on top of the ocean. 2 volcanoes erupting as the smoke coming from the volcano's mouth covered the skies in a big shroud. Ashes falling as it were black snow. One man was fighting against nature itself, his long white hair sticking to his aged face and forehead with sweat as he bended earth, fire and wind to calm the raging volcano, but he was unsuccessful, and closed his eyes in anger at his failure. "Need a hand, old friend?" The old man turned behind him to see who had arrived, and was surprised to see that it was his former best friend, Fire Lord himself. "Sozin!" exclaimed the old man surprised. "We have no time to waste, Roku," exclaimed the Fire Lord as he got off his dragon and joined his former friend in the attempt to calm down the volcano. Both stepped closer at the mouth of the volcano as the lava was pouring out like a geyser. Roku placed both his hands together as he closed his eyes and slowly brought them down as he exhaled his breath, pushing the lava down into the volcano. While Sozin extended his hand towards the river of molten rock and extracted the heat from the lava as he expelled it through his other hand, successfully calming it down somewhat till it erupted again with more force, making the ground underneath the Fire Lord collapse and would have fallen to his demise if it hadn't been for Avatar Roku, saving him as he extended his arm outward, bending the earth to make a small platform underneath Sozin, and nodded his thanks at Roku. The volcano erupted even stronger as the ground trembled, parting the ground its wake, and the two began to run for safety. A short distance away from the island that Avatar Roku lived in, deep under the water, an underwater rock slide was occurring as the ground continued to part. A giant boulder fell from its place, revealing an undamaged giant pillar of ice resting in captivity, its binds beginning to crack as the tremors kept getting stronger and stronger till the pillar was finally free and began to float away to the surface. "Don't breathe the toxic gases," shouted Roku as he bended the air to blow away the air toxins, but the ground cracked underneath him and the poisonous gas shot into his face as he took a deep breath. Coughing and feeling noxious, Avatar Roku fell to one knee as he began to cough, and with his vision going blurry, he reached out for Sozin. "Please, Sozin," coughed Roku as he still held out his hand as he begged the Fire Lord for his help, and Sozin just stood there, staring back at the Avatar passively, till out of the blue, Sozin shot his fist forward and a flare of dark flames shot out of his fist, nailing the Avatar right in the chest, fatally wounding him as he was sent flying backwards, landing with a loud thud on the ground. A shocked Roku slowly sat up and held his chest, trying to put down the black flames that still burned his flesh, and was shocked to see the flames didn't disperse. Staring in shock at the betrayal of his former friend, the Avatar glared hatefully at the Fire Lord, as the wound and the poisonous gas finally beginning to take its toll on his body. "Why Sozin?" muttered the Avatar as he stared at his former friend, but Sozin's appearance began to change. Roku thought that the toxins had affected his sense of sight, but this was proved wrong as the change of features was complete, and in Sozin's place a raven-haired guy, that looked to be in his early 20s, stood there. His eyes crimson as the blood itself with a dark ring around the iris and 3 tomos on each eye, his face stone passive as he glared at the Avatar. "You're not Sozin. Who are you and what have you done to him?" shouted Roku as he glared hatefully at the person in front of him. "Sozin has been dead for the past 60 years. I killed him after you had left on your journey to master the remaining elements. The prince found me frozen at a cave near the beach and freed me, helped me regain my strength as he told me the history of the world. Seeing the new possibilities of this age, I advised him to use his might to conquer the other nations since it was the most powerful of the 4, but the fool refused and turned against me and challenged me, believing he could defeat me, so I killed him and took his place." "In the throne," confirmed the impostor. "It wasn't hard, due to the fact that the ancient arts seemed to be forgotten, and placing an illusion over myself to make me look like Sozin wasn't much of a challenge. I had hoped on your return, that you would not make the same foolish mistake your friend made, but yet again, I was proved wrong as you opposed me, defeating me without effort despite my power, but that was my mistake since I underestimated you, for you're not just the Avatar, but a direct descendant of him and his bastard offspring as well," finished the raven-haired man with a snarl as he glared hatefully at Roku. "But with you gone, all my plans are going to be realized. I have a vision for the future, Roku, with me being its sole ruler," finished the raven-haired impostor as his dragon landed behind him, waiting for his master to mount him. Mounting the dragon, the red-eyed impostor stared passively at Roku and flew out of the island in haste, without turning back. Back at the island, Roku kept glaring into the distance where Sozin's dragon flew, coughing and holding his chest in pain as he kneeled on the ground. Fang, the Avatar's dragon, saw his master being in danger as the avalanche came crashing down the island. The dragon flew down towards Roku and wrapped himself around him, the avalanche engulfing both of them into their death along with the rest of the deserted village as the volcano continued to erupt. Far away, the ice pillar had emerged, floating away into the South Pole, with the view of the lava gashing out of the volcano at a distance, unknowingly to await another century in order to finally awaken. Meanwhile, at the Southern Air Temple, a little baby boy with brown hair was brought to the world, the mother smiling tenderly at her child. Not knowing of the fate that was set for the air nomads and the destiny that awaited he child, They continued to celebrate, only for said child to disappear 12 years later in the world's desperate time of need and to reappear in a world of chaos 100 years later. 40 years had passed since the war first began, and the land in the South Pole hadn't changed since. A squad of waterbenders was scouting the seas, looking for Fire Nation warships that dared to intrude and threaten their home, for it's not wise to be on unguarded in times of war, especially since the Fire Nation soldiers were persistent of eradicating every waterbender in the South Pole. "The area looks clear, let's head home," shouted the leader of the squad to his squadron as he turned towards them, but just as he turned, he saw a black shadow underneath the ice. Curious as to what was inside, he ordered his men to stop. "Halt, I think we found something," said the leader, bending the water towards the iceberg. As soon as the boat hit shore, the leader stepped out and walked to the shadow. Not being able to see anything due to the snow that covered it, the man used his hand to wipe the snow away, giving him a clear view of the being that was inside, and to his shock, he found a man trapped within. "What is the hell?" said the leader in shock. The view slowly peers into the iceberg, deep inside the pillar as it indeed revealed a man frozen inside the ice, having blonde hair with black bracers and tattered clothing. And, cut. First official chapter of Avatar of the Four Dragons has been posted, and hopefully, it's a beginning that lives up to the expectations of the trailer I made, although it's only just the beginning. There is a couple of things I would like to explain. Udon is blind in this story. I decided to change the number of years that had passed, since by watching the series, I saw that there were a lot of reincarnations. I will explain as to how Naruto came to obtaining the power to bend the elements at later chapters to come, and took Inari, Moegi, Konohamaru and Inari as his students R&R. Let me know what you think and hope all of you enjoyed it. Till next time. The Ninth Fist Out. Book 1 Chapter 2. I'm glad you guys like the way this story is going, and I hope to keep entertaining you guys with the oncoming chapters. Explanation at the end of the chapter every time this is posted. Disclaimers. I don't own Naruto or Avatar, The Last Airbender. Intro. Water. Earth. Fire. Air. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the old days, a time of peace, when the Avatar kept the balance between the water tribes, Earth Kingdom, Fire Nation, and Air Nomads. That all changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Only the Avatar could master all four elements. Only he could have stopped the ruthless firebenders, but when the world needed him most, he vanished. 100 years have passed and the Fire Nation is nearing victory in the war. 2 years ago, my father and the men of my tribe journeyed to the Earth Kingdom to help fight against the Fire Nation, leaving me and my brother to look after our tribe. Some people believe that the Avatar was never reborn into the Air Nomads, and believe the cycle to be broken. But I haven't lost hope, for I feel a presence out there, someone powerful that can help us turn the tide and end the war, just like he did centuries ago. For, I still believe, that someday, the Avatar will return to save the world. The return of the Avatar of Four Dragons awakens. For 100 years, the war that Fire Lord Sozin had started waged on, with the catastrophes being high, and the entire balance between the nations was destroyed when the Fire Lord ordered the eradication of the Air Nomads in order to stop the rebirth cycle of the Avatar. But the Avatar had fled the temples before the Fire Nation launched their attack without his knowing and disappeared from the face of the world, only to finally wake up once again. The view goes around in the sky, passing through the clouds as it finally cleared and showed on top of the Arctic waters of the South Pole. A small boat could be seen slowly drifting on the sea between the glaciers, and inside the small boat were 2 teenagers. One boy with tan skin, blue eyes, shaved head save for a strip of brown hair pulled back in a small ponytail, and his companion was a girl, who also with tan skin, blue eyes, and brown hair. Whole some of her hair was pulled into a bun, as the rest was braided into a ponytail beneath it. Both were wearing thick blue fur clothes to protect them from the freezing winds. The boy held a spear as he hungrily eyed the fish that swam by. "It's not getting away from me this time," he said greedily. "Watch and learn, Katara," he said to the girl. "This is how you catch a fish." Katara threw him a skeptical look, then looked down and spotted another fish. Taking off her glove, she raised her hand and began to wave her hand, causing a globe of water holding the fish to rise out of the water. Sokka, look, she called out excitedly. Shush, Katara. You're gonna scare him away, he whispered, not taking his eyes off the fish. He licked his lips. I already smell him cooking. But Sokka, I caught one. She continued to move the globe through the air. Just as Sokka reared the spear back going for the strike, he didn't notice the water globe behind him, and with his spear, he stick it into the globe, popping it like a balloon, splashing all over as he cried out, and the fish jumped back into the sea. Hey! Katara yelled as she glared at Sokka. Growling, he turned and glared at his sister. Why is that every time you play with magic water I get soaked? Katara sighed tiredly as she once again had to argue with her brother. It's not magic. It's waterbending, and it's... Yeah, an ancient art unique to our culture. Blah, blah, blah. Sokka recited annoyingly. You've only told like 1,000 times. Thought in his mind. Look, I'm just saying that if I had weird powers, I'd keep my weirdness to myself. You're just as weird as that giant chunk of ice that has been in the middle of the village for Lord knows how many years. Katara raised an eyebrow. You're calling me weird? I'm not the one who makes muscles at myself every time I see my reflection, smirking as her point was proven, since Sokka was doing it right now. Realizing that Katara had proven her point, Sokka stopped his flexing and glared at her. Then suddenly, the boat began to shake as it was picked up by a fast current. Grabbing the paddle, Sokka started paddling to keep from crashing into ice chunks while his sister started screamed. Watch out! Katara yelled as she noticed 2 chunks of ice were headed their way in a collision course, making both of them get scared, for if the boat got caught between them, it would be crushed along with them. Go left, she cried. Then the boat rammed into several ice chunks before ultimately getting crushed by the ice, as they were forced out of the boat and onto a platform chunk of ice. Both looked up and looked around, realizing that they were stranded. You call that let? Deadpanned Katara, looking at her brother. You don't like my steering? Well, maybe you should have water-bended us out of the ice, Sokka said as he sat up, making a water-bending motion. Katara stood up. So it's my fault? She said while her eyebrow was twitching annoyingly. I knew I should have left you home. Leave it to a girl to mess things up, scoffed Sokka as he crossed his arms. Katara glared at him angrily. You are the most sexist, immature, nut-brained, she yelled, flailing her arms around wildly, unconsciously bending the water behind her. I'm embarrassed to be related to you. Causing the iceberg behind her beginning to crack and break to pieces with her anger, while Sokka kept staring wide-eyed. Ever since Mom died I've been doing all the work around camp while you've been off playing soldier. Katara, Sokka said meekly as he put his. I even wash all the clothes. Have you even smelled your dirty socks? Let me tell you. Not pleasant. The iceberg cracked further as she continued to make angry faces. Katara. Settle down, said Sokka as he tried to calm his sister down. No, that's it, I'm done helping you. From now on you're on your own. And finally, the iceberg broke completely, catching Katara's attention as she turned. As it collapsed, it created large waves that pushed them back even further. Okay. You've gone from weird to freakish, Katara, deadpanned Sokka. You mean I did that? Asked a surprised Katara. Yep, congratulations, said the warrior wannabe as he put his hand on her shoulder, but a blue light suddenly appeared from underneath and caught their attention. The water bubbled as it got bigger as the light kept glowing brighter and brighter until the light burst out of the water, turning out to be a giant glowing iceberg as it floated on the water with 2 shadows stuck inside the ice. Katara looked closely at the iceberg and saw 2 figures, one big and one small. She raised an eyebrow in curiosity. What the heck? She thought the smaller shape opened its glowing eyes, shocking the 2 teens. He's alive. We have to help him, Katara exclaimed as she snatched Sokka's club and headed toward the iceberg. Katara, get back here, Sokka ordered. We don't know what that thing is. He grabbed his spear and chased after his sister. By the time he got there, Katara was already clubbing the iceberg with all her might as she swung 2 times and a small crack began to form. With one last mighty swing and managed to break through, releasing a burst of air that blew them back. The crack began to course around the iceberg right through the middle before finally burst with a blue light shot up into the sky. Tiger seals roared in fright but stopped after a big boom. The light shot into what looked like a big hole in the sky where the same colored light circled down around the beam and crashed into the iceberg. However, Katara, Sokka, and the tiger seals weren't the only ones to see the light. A metal boat not too far away with the flag of fire was sailing through the icebergs, and in it, a teenage boy in red and black armor stared at the light in slight awe before his golden eyes began to narrow, glaring at it. Finally, he said, his head was mostly shaved, just a small patch of hair where a ponytail grew out of it. But his most noticeable feature, however, was the scar covering his left eye to his ear, as his eye could barely open due to the massive scar. "Uncle, do you realize what this means?" the boy said to an old man wearing red robes and armor. "I won't get to finish my game," the man responded. "It means," the boy ignored the remark, "my search is about to come to an end." The old man sighed while rubbing his eyes and just shook his head. "Here we go again," he thought. "That light came from an incredibly powerful source, Uncle. It has to be him," retorted the scarred firebender to the old man, "or it's just the celestial lights. We've been down this road before, Prince Zuko. I don't want you to get too excited over nothing again," Zuko's uncle said as he continued playing his game of cards. "Now come and sit. Why don't you have a nice cup of calming jasmine tea?" "I don't need any freaking calming tea. I need to capture the Avatar," Zuko exclaimed angrily, and then turned towards the tower of the ship. "Helmsman, head a course to the light." Iroh sighed and placed an air card over another air card as a gentle breeze swept through the ship. The steam had finally cleared, allowing the siblings to see the broken part of the iceberg. As they looked at each other then back to the iceberg, Sokka raised his spear as if waiting for something or someone to suddenly come out and attack them, but he didn't have to wait long for a young boy with a glowing arrow on his head rose out the iceberg. Raising his spear higher, pointing at the kid, he yelled, "Stop!" The kid stood fully up, looking very intimidating as he based his eyes at the two. The glow slowly disappeared and Baldy collapsed onto the ground, heading head first, but luckily, Katara was able to catch him before he hit the ground and gently held him in her arms. Sokka scooted near the kid that lay on his sister's arms and began to poke him on the head with his spear. Katara, getting annoyed with her brother's antics, swatted the spear away as she glared at him. "Stop it," Katara told her brother before she gently laid him down on the snow. The bald one slowly started to awaken, opening his storm gray eyes and groggily looked at Katara before gasping softly. "Beautiful," he thought. "I need to ask you something," he said weakly. "What? Please come closer. What is it? Will you go penguin sledding with me?" he asked excitedly as his eyes went wide open. Katara raised an eyebrow at his sudden burst of energy, not sure of what to do or say. Sure, I guess." While his sister was occupied talking to the newfound stranger, Sokka was studying him. The kid was bald with an arrow going from his forehead and down his neck to most likely his back, arms and legs. His attire consisted of yellow clothing, Earth Kingdom, thought Sokka, but the lack of green clothing told him that wasn't the case and made him scratch that theory out. Orange and yellow. Why does that sound familiar? Finished his thoughts as he started to scratch his chin as he watched the bald kid float to his feet, causing Sokka to jump back in surprise with his mouth open and spear in front. "What's going on here?" asked the kid. "You tell us, how did you get in the ice? And why aren't you frozen?" demanded Sokka as he began poking him with his spear, but the kid swatted his spear away as he looked around. A deep growl startled both Sokka and Katara, but Baldy just climbed back into the glacier and jumped down to land on a giant ball of white fur. "Appa, are you all right? Wake up, buddy," said Baldy as he lifted the creature's eyelid, but got no response, so he tried waking it up by trying to lift his face. The siblings came around the corner of the iceberg and saw the kid messing with the creature and gasped when the furry animal licked the kid, raising him from the ground as he laughed. "You're okay," said Baldy as he hugged the snout. "What is that?" asked Sokka. "This is Appa, my flying bison," replied the kid as he turned around, but Sokka just had a deadpan look in his face, clearly not believing him. "Rig, and this is Katara, my flying sister," said Sokka sarcastically as he pointed with his thumb towards the girl next to him. The bison suddenly started make faces as his nose started to itch, and sneezed hard as green snot shot out of his nose. The kid managed to dodge just in time as he ducked, but Sokka wasn't as fortunate as he got covered in mucus, and stood there grimacing as he rolled on the ground, trying to scrub off the snot off of him. He ran his face through the snow. "Don't worry, it'll wash off," said the kid to Sokka as he pulled his hand away from his face, filled with snot, while Katara covered her mouth with her hand as she giggled. "Gross," was all he said. "So do you guys live around here?" the bald boy asked. Suddenly, Katara's brother jumped in between Tem with his spear pointed at him menacingly. "Don't answer that. Did you see that crazy beam of light?" He was probably trying to signal the fire nation, said Sokka as he eyed the kid cautiously, further annoyed with her brother's stupidity. She just rolled her eyes as she pushed her brother back. "Oh yeah, he's a Fire Nation spy. You can tell by his appearance and the evil look in his eyes," said Katara as she gestured toward the kid, and Baldy just grinned innocently while the blonde tilted his head, eyes squinted, causing Sokka's eyebrow to twitch. "The paranoid one is my brother Sokka. You never told us your name." "I'm Chu." But before he could properly introduce himself, the bald kid sneezed, blowing a small cloud of snow as he flew into the sky, landing softly into the ground as he sniffed. "I'm Aang." "You just sneezed and flew 10 feet in the air," Sokka stated incredulously as he lazily pointed at Aang. "Really? It felt higher than that," Katara gasped, eyes squinted in surprise. "You're an airbender?" "Sure am," grinned Aang. "Giant light beams, flying bison, airbenders, think I've got midnight sun madness. I'm going home where things make sense." He turned around and realized that there was no way off the iceberg as he stupidly glazed into the distance. "Well, if you guys are stuck, Appa and I can give you a lift." Aang airbent himself onto Appa's head. "We'd love a ride, thanks." Katara bowed. "Oh no, I am not getting on that fluffy snot monster," Sokka protested. "Are you hoping some other kind of monster will come along and give you a ride? You know, before you freeze to death," said the waterbender in training to Sokka, but before he started to say something, he suddenly stopped, for he had no argument and gave up, stubbornly climbed on top of the bison, crossing his arms in annoyance while Katara seemed excited. "Okay. First time flyers, hold on tight," Aang called. "Appa, yip yip." Appa flapped his tail and jumped into the air, and only to lazily jump into the water and started to swim. "Wow, that was truly amazing," Sokka says, full of sarcasm, rolling his eyes. "Appa's just tired. A little rest and he'll be soaring through the sky." Aang made a soaring motion with his head. "You'll see," he smiled back at them, particularly at Katara, staring at her brown hair, tanned skin, and ocean blue eyes. "Why are you smiling at me like that?" she asked, noticing his stare. "Oh, I was smiling?" Aang asked, trying to play it off, making Sokka groan while Katara turned around and glared at her brother. They swam for a while till it finally turned dusk, and everyone had gone to sleep as they rest till they had reached the tribe. Dreamscape. Everything was gray and pale browns. Thunder clashed as Aang woke up on top of Appa, struggling against Appa's reins as the heavy rain crashing down. Down they plummeted into the raging water as Aang screamed. They come up briefly for air. Appa groans as he struggled to get out of the water, but they are once again driven under the waver by the massive waves caused by the storm. As they drift downward, Aang drops Appa's reins and begins to lose consciousness. Suddenly, Aang's eyes and markings glow white and puts his hands together, and the water around him and Appa starts to freeze. End dreamscape. "Aang, Aang, wake up," Katara's voice sounds. "Come on, get ready." "We're in the village and everyone wants to meet you too," said Katara as she was about to walk out of the tent, but stopped as she looked at Aang, while pulling on his clothes. Katara looked at his tattoos running almost all over his body, from the arms and head down his back and legs. Getting impatient, she grabbed Aang's hand and dragged him out of the tent and into the middle of the tribe. A group of people waiting for them outside of the tent, standing in front of a giant column of ice, standing in front of the group that mostly consisting of women and children. "Aang, this is the village, entire village, Aang." Katara introduced him to the village while Aang simply bowed, but the villagers backed away a bit in small fright as the children scooted close to their mothers as they hugged their children close. Leaning closer to Katara, he whispered, "Why are they looking at me like that? Did Appa sneeze on me?" As he looked around himself to see find any snot. An old woman stepped up from the group, "No, young one, we're just surprised, for no one has seen an airbender in 100 years. We thought they were extinct until my granddaughter and grandson found you." "Extinct?" Aang asked in surprise as he thought, "Extinct? What's she talking about?" Feeling a nudge at the back of his head, Aang looked around to see where it was coming from, but couldn't point it out. Then he looked up behind the group, staring curiously and intensely at the ice pillar, and the feeling began to feel stronger, as if something was calling out to him as his eyes started to glaze. Nobody noticed it, but a small, luminous glow of red appeared within the ice, giving a soft hum that only the bald kid could hear. Suddenly, he was snapped out of his trance as Katara had placed her hand on his shoulder, turning his direction back to the elderly woman. "This is my grandmother," Katara introduced the old woman. "Call me Gran," she simply said. "What's with giant boulder of ice that's standing right in the middle of the village?" suddenly asked Aang without taking his eyes away from the pillar, surprising the elderly woman completely. "This tower of ice was brought to the Souther tribe about 60 or so years ago when I was just a child. Inside resides a man that is to be believed to be quite old like yourself. If not older, but despite the efforts of the waterbenders that used to live here, the ice could not be destroyed or turned to water, as if unconsciously, the man inside was the one maintaining it together," said Kana as she turned back towards the pillar, continuing her story. "We believe that only the Avatar himself had the sufficient power in order to break the ice, but unfortunately, he disappeared a century ago with the rest of the air nomads," finished the elder as she sighed, closing her eyes, nobody noticing Aang flinching at the mention of the Avatar. "Has anyone been able to find out who exactly is frozen inside?" Aang continued to ask, as he now turned his attention from the tower to the old woman. Shaking her head slowly, she replied, "No, we haven't. But before the Fire Nation raided our tribe, the captain that found the iceberg theorized that the person inside the ice was the one that started the cycle and brought bending to the world, due to the strange and glowing crimson patterns he described according to legend." "Wait, what legend? And by what you mean, the one who started the cycle?" asked a now confused Aang, scratching his head. "She refers to the legend of the Crimson Avatar," clarified Katara, "also known as the Avatar of 4 Dragons." "Crimson Avatar? Never heard of him," exclaimed Aang. "I'm not surprised, young one. The Avatar of 4 Dragons is to be believed just a myth, an old tale passed down through the ages to tell the young ones. No one believes that he actually existed, for there aren't any records about him, and if there were, then most likely they were lost through time," explained Gran, with everyone listening intensely to every word their elder said. Till out of the blue, Sokka snatched Aang's staff out his hand, distracting everyone out of their stupor, as he inspected the staff. "What is this? A weapon? You can't stab anything with this." Aang used airbending to suck the staff of his hands and right back to him. "It's not used for stabbing. It's for airbending," he explained as he slammed the butt of the staff onto the ground, orange fan-like. Wings popped out. "Magic trick. Do it again," a little girl clapped. "Not magic, airbending," Aang corrected. "It lets me control the air currents around my glider and fly." Sokka snorted and crossed his arms. "Last time I checked, humans can't fly." Aang smirked. "Check again," and he shot up into the sky, sailing through the air doing as he twists and turns, loops and spins, much to the awe of the villagers. Aang being distracted by all the attention he was getting from the villagers, he failed to see the snow tower ahead as he crashed into it seconds later, getting his head stocked on the tower, trying to free himself as he tried to pull himself out, but only to fall out and collapsing onto the ground with the tower now leaning to the side. "My watchtower!" Sokka cried. Katara walked towards Aang as he was somewhat buried in ice, and helped him up. "That was amazing," she said while Sokka was mourning his tower. "Great. He's an airbender, Katara's a waterbender, and together you can just waste time all day long," grumbled Sokka as he sulked. "You're a waterbender," Aang exclaimed excitedly as he turned to Katara, but they were interrupted by the siblings' grandmother. "All right, no more playing, Katara, you have chores," Gran interjected, causing Katara to sigh and walk away with her grandmother. "I can't believe it, Gran. I finally found a bender to teach me," said Katara with excitement. "Katara, don't put all of your hopes in that boy," was Gran's reply as she held her hands behind her. "But Aang's special, I can tell. I can sense he's full of wisdom," countered Katara as she made an optimistic face. But as soon as they looked over at Aang, with his tongue stuck to his staff due to the ice, they sweat dropped. "Stay? Now my tongue ith stuck to my staff," said the airbender, only to have one child of the group to pull the staff, causing Aang to grimace a little and making the children start to laugh. Back at the Fire Nation ship as they continued on its way deeper into southern Water Tribe waters as the sun began to set, its orange-red colors illuminating the skies. Zuko faced off against two of his firebending crew members on deck, while Iroh sat nearby, observing from a distance. "Again," he says sternly, watching Zuko shot blasts of fire at them which they ducked under with ease. One retaliated with his own blast that Zuko ducked under, then back-flipped over a blast from the other soldier. While in midair, Zuko punched and kicked blasts of fire at both of them, but they blocked it as he landed, facing his opponents. Iroh sighed. "No, power in firebending comes from the breath, not the muscles. The breath becomes energy in the body. The energy extends past your limbs and becomes fire." He shot a fire blast that stopped short of Zuko's face. "Get it right this time." "Enough. I've been drilling this set all day. Teach me the next set, I'm more than ready." "No, you are impatient. You haven't even mastered the basics yet. Drill it again," said Iroh harshly as he narrowed his eyes at his stubborn nephew. Zuko growled and turned with a spinning kick, blasting fire from his foot, hitting his target, despite the efforts of his sparring partner made in order to block it. The sages tell us that the Avatar is the last airbender. He must be over 100 years old. He's had a century to master the elements. "I'll need more than basic firebending to defeat him," exclaimed Zuko, only causing to Iroh frown. "You will teach me the advanced set," demanded the banished prince. Iroh hardened his eyes and took a deep sigh before he replied relentlessly, "Fine, but first I must finish my roast duck," said the general as he pulled out a bowl and began eating happily. Zuko grimaced as he saw his uncle pigging out. How did he go from strict master to disgusting slob? Thought Zuko as he slammed his forehead on his palm. Nighttime. Aang and Katara were inside a tent, getting ready to go to bed, talking about today's events, and curious still, Aang asked her a question that has been on his mind. "Katara." "Yes, Aang. How is it that you know much about him, the Crimson Avatar, I mean?" The question caught her a little off guard, her shoulders slumping down in sadness. "My mother used to tell me the story when I was a little girl, telling me how he single-handedly stopped the war and brought peace to the lands many centuries ago, only mysteriously disappear without as much a trace." Paused Katara as she wiped a lone tear that appeared on her eye, as she remembered fondly when her mother would tuck her in bed and tell her the story. "I'm sorry to bring painful memories," mumbled Aang, noticing the sadness in her voice. "It's okay, Aang," said the waterbender in training, smiling softly at him. "Let's get some rest, K." Aang just nodded his head as he jumped into the bed, and sleepily he yawned, closing his eyes. "Night, Katara." "Night, Aang," replied Katara as she walked out of the tent. Later that night, Aang laid on his bed, restless as he could not shake off the feeling he felt when stared at the pillar, and somehow, it felt familiar, but he could not place a finger on it. Why does its presence feel so familiar? Wondered Aang in his thoughts as he laid his head on his arms, but decided to find out on his own accord as he got up from his bed and got dressed, and walked out of his tent, standing right outside his tent with his sights right on the pillar. As he started to walk down to the middle of the tribe, he couldn't help but notice how massive it was, stopping suddenly as he was now standing in front of the beam of ice. "What are you?" muttered Aang as he once again looked up at the center of the pillar, and the same humming sound he heard earlier came back, his eyes glazing as if he were hypnotized, and slowly brought his hand up and placed it on the pillar, and slowly closed his eyes. Unknowingly to Aang, Katara's grandmother, Gran, was watching the young airbender with curiosity as he headed towards the center of the village, eyeing him as he just stared up above, and softly placing his hand onto the ice, and at first, nothing happened. But to her shock, a soft crimson glow began to emit from within the ice, and at the same time, Aang's arrows began to glow softly as well, illuminating the village lightly along with the aurora that hovered with the night for a few minutes, till it finally stopped and Aang, quietly, went back to his tent. "So, the Avatar has returned to us," thought Kanna in shock. Looking in the direction the airbender went, but then shifted her sights back to the pillar. "But what is it that makes you special to gain the Avatar's attention?" It was early morning of the next day, and Sokka was having a meeting with his soldiers, training as to what to do when facing a firebender. "Now men, it's important to show no fear when facing a firebender. In the Water Tribe, we fight till the last man standing, for without courage, how can we call ourselves men?" said Sokka as he walked side to side, and once he finished, he turned to his soldiers, his 6-year-old soldiers. "I gotta go pee," one boy announced, raising his hand. "Listen, until your fathers return from the war, they're counting on you to be the men of the tribe, so no potty breaks," exclaimed Sokka. "But I really have to go," the boy protested, holding it in really bad. Sokka sighed. "Okay, who else has to go?" and all the kids raised their hands. Sokka slapped his forehead in frustration while thinking, "We're doomed." "Have you seen Aang?" Katara asked. Gran said he disappeared over an hour ago." Aang crawled out a small igloo. "Wow, you can freeze anything in there." Sokka groaned. "Katara, get him out of here. This lesson is for warriors only." The children were using Appa's tail as a slide and landed on in a pile of snow, aggravating Sokka even further. "Stop. Stop it now." Sokka glared angrily at the outsider. "What's wrong with you? We don't have time for fun and games with a war going on." "War?" asked Aang while he hopped down from Appa. "What are you talking about?" "You're kidding, right?" deadpanned Sokka. Then Aang looked behind Sokka and exclaimed, "Penguin!" Said Penguin jumped in surprise and waddled away with Aang zooming after it using airbending. The siblings stared at where they ran off to. "He's kidding, right?" After Aang had gone to chase the penguin, Katara had ran after him, trying to get him to teach her waterbending, despite knowing that he could only bend air. He's sitting to give him a break. Katara showed him the way of catching a penguin by throwing him a fish and getting swarmed by them, and they sled across the snowy fields laughing along the way, till finally they reached an abandoned Fire Nation warship, stacked up in ice by the former waterbenders of the tribe. Katara explained to him as to how it was one of the first attacks made by the Fire Nation when her grandmother was nothing but a child, and how it had become painful memory to the people of her tribe, and to herself, for it reminded them of what they lost, and how the Fire Nation took her mother away from her and her brother. Aang, either by curiosity or stupidity, he walked near towards the ship, ignoring the cries of Katara of staying away. The airbender manages to convince her to come inside, and the two begin talk. Aang, believing the talk of war on the 4 nations being false, denies it as he tells Katara that he had friends all over the nations, including the Fire Nation. But reality hit him hard as Katara made him realize that he had been frozen for not just a few years, but for an entire century. Saddened at the time he had been suspended, Aang sits against the wall, with his friend telling him everything was going to be okay. But fate had other plans, for as soon as they were about to leave, Aang had accidentally stepped into a booby trap, and a gate closed the entrance of the ship, trapping them inside as a flare had shot up into the sky, exploding as it illuminated the area. The whole village saw the flare and knew it meant danger, for a fire ship could have seen the flare and come into their direction. Not far away, Prince Zuko saw the flare, and using his telescope, he saw the Avatar escaping the ship, heading to the nearest village on the west, and headed straight for course. Katara was worried that the whole village had seen the flare, and when they saw the village ahead, sure enough all the villagers were standing outside the village awaiting for them. As soon as they approached the entrance of the village, most of the children ran out and gathered around Aang, but one person wasn't happy in seeing him. Sokka pointed at the airbender accusingly. "I knew it. You signaled the fire navy with that flare. You're leading them here." "He didn't do anything. It was an accident," Katara said, defending him. "We were on the ship, and the booby trap. I set it off," began Aang, only to stop once the crowd began glaring at him. Gran shook her head, sternly glaring at her granddaughter. "Katara, you shouldn't have gone on that ship. You know it is forbidden. Now we could all be in danger." "Don't blame Katara," Aang spoke. "She warned me about the ship, but I didn't listen, and I convinced her to go in," Aang admitted. He bowed. "I'm sorry." "Aha!" Sokka shouted triumphantly. "The traitor confesses." "Warriors away from the enemy," ordered Sokka, making the kids step away from Aang in sadness, while Sokka kept glaring resentfully at Aang. "The foreigner is banned from the village." "Sokka, you're making a mistake," Katara argued. "No, I'm keeping my promise to Dad," Sokka retorted. "I'm protecting you from threats like him." "Aang is not our enemy," Katara yelled. "Don't you see? He has brought us something we haven't had in a long time, fun." Sokka scoffed. "Fun? We can't fight firebenders with fun. You also can't fight them with 6-year-olds. Katara thought bitterly. Aang smiled. "You should try it sometime." "Get out of our village," Sokka yelled. Turning towards her gran, she hoped that she would talk some sense into her brother. "Grandmother, please, don't let Sokka do this," Katara pleaded. "Katara, you knew going on that ship was forbidden. Sokka is right. I think it is best if the airbender leaves," finalized the elder of the village, while thinking, "Even if he is the Avatar, I cannot risk the safety of the village." Katara was stunned at her grandmother's response. Couldn't they see that Aang wasn't dangerous? She was angry. Angry at Sokka for being stupid and tyrannical. Angry at her grandmother for being so closed-minded. "Well, if Sokka could make a decision like this, so can I," thought Katara. "Fine," she screamed. "Then I'm banished as well. Come on, Aang, let's go," she said as she took him by the arm and walked off towards Appa. "Where do you think you're going?" Sokka questioned, shocked at his sister's actions. "To find a waterbender. He's taking me to the North Pole," she yelled back. Aang blinked. "I am?" Then smiled brightly. "Great." Sokka frowned at this, refusing to believe that Katara was taking the stranger's side. She wouldn't do that to her own Paope, would she? "Katara, you wouldn't choose them over your tribe? Your own family, would you?" Sokka voiced his thoughts out loud. This made Katara stop. "I don't know, would I?" she thought. Sensing the inner struggle she had, Aang intervened. "Katara, I don't want to come between you and your family," Aang said, then walked off towards Appa. "So you're leaving the South Pole?" Katara asked, sadness evident in her voice. "This is goodbye?" "Afraid so, but thanks for penguin sledding with me," Aang said. "Where will you go?" Katara asked. "Guess I'll go back home. Look for the airbenders." Then a thought hit him, making him shudder. "Wow, I haven't cleaned my room in 100 years. Not looking forward to that." "It was nice meeting everyone," Aang said to the village. "Let's see your bison fly now, airboy," Sokka sneered. "Come on, Appa, you can do it." "Yip yip," Appa groaned, but only stood up. Sokka snorted. "I thought so." Before Appa began to walk out of the village, a little girl wailed and ran up next to Katara. "Don't go, I'll miss you," she said with small tears forming at the corner of her eyes. Aang looked at her sadly. "I'll miss you too." Aang looked at Katara, who looked back at him with sad eyes. Turning away, Aang snapped the reins and left the village. Watching till Aang was out of sight, the little girl walked back into the village sadly, next to the saddened kids. Gran walked up to her granddaughter, Katara. "You'll feel better after you. You happy now?" Katara cut her off as she turned angrily, small tears on her eyes as well. "There goes my one chance of becoming a waterbender." She stormed off, leaving Gran feeling guilty. "All right. Ready our defenses. The Fire Nation could be on our shores any moment," Sokka yelled to his troops. "But I gotta. And no potty breaks." Long after Aang had left the village, Sokka had gone to his tent, for if he was going to fight the Fire Nation, he was going to fight, dressed as a true Water Tribe warrior. Putting on his toughest leather's armor, pulled on his gloves, tightened his tunic, and put on black, white, and gray war paint on his face, he was ready for battle, and a small breeze swept inside the tent, making the candlelight to flicker, meaning that the enemy was nearby. Realizing this, Sokka got up and prepared to meet them head-on. At the warship, with the help of attendants, Zuko was fitted into his armor. He prepared, for he was taking no chances with this battle, due to who his opponent was. A helmet with a flame emblem on the front was placed on his head. Done with his preparation, Zuko left his chambers, ready to face what was to be expected to be the battle of his life. Unfortunately, little does he know how sadly disappointed he was going to be. Sokka stood on top of the ice wall serving as a lookout, expecting the Fire Nation to arrive at any time, and he was disappointed. Suddenly, everything started to shake as a rumbling noise boomed across the village, the villagers looking up in alarm as parts of the ice wall began to crack and crumbled down, along Sokka's watchtower. "Ah man," Sokka moaned, seeing his tower being demolished. A huge shadow could be seen through the mist, approaching the village fast. "Ah shit." Sokka's voice cracked, watching the ship break through the frozen waters, cracking the ice even further all the way into the village. Katara was about to run for shelter, but saw a kid had fallen and being in danger, for the kid was in the way of the splitting ice. Running back to get the kid, just barely rescuing him from the cracking ice. Reaching for a tent, she put him inside and turned to her brother. Sokka was still on the wall with his club raised high, like he was going to attack the ship with it. "Sokka, get out of the way." He heard Katara scream, "Trust me, I want to," were his thoughts, but his pride, determination, fear, and stupidity kept him there. The ship finally reached the wall, causing it to fall back, and somehow the part Sokka was standing on stayed intact, sliding downhill in front of the ship. The bowsprit opened down with screech, almost crushing Sokka, who barely moved out the way. The steam was clearing up, revealing Zuko and several Fire Nation soldiers in tow, walking down the now gangplank. Standing halfway down the gangplank, Zuko scanned the crowd, looking for someone who looked like, well, Avatarish. Meanwhile, Sokka got his bearings straight and charged at Zuko with a war cry. Zuko measly scoffed and easily kicked the club away from Sokka's hand, and then kicked Sokka in the side of his head, sending headfirst into the snow with his legs wiggling in the air, causing entire the tribe gasped in fear at how easily Sokka was beaten. They stepped back as the soldiers reached them, with Zuko still maintaining his sights at the crowd, made of nothing but women and children. "Where are you hiding him?" Zuko questioned, causing the villagers to get confused and not knowing how to respond. Getting a little frustrated, the scarred prince reached out to grab Gran out of the crowd. He'd be about this age, master of all elements, and still, they had no idea as to what he was talking about. He then pushed Gran back into Katara's arms, and let loose a wave of fire over their heads, making the villagers cringe in fear even more. "I know you're hiding him," Zuko yelled. Recovering from the simple beating he received, Sokka picked up his club and charged at Zuko once again with another war cry. Zuko just mentally sighed. Stupid water peasant. He thought while ducking under Sokka, and flipped him over his head, and fired a blast of fire at Sokka. Rolling out of the way, Sokka reached for his boomerang and threw it at the fire prince. Zuko just narrowly avoided being hit in the head with it, gritting his teeth in anger. From the crowd, a little boy held a spear and tossed it to Sokka while crying, "Show no fear." Sokka, and for a third time, he charged at Zuko with no more success than the previous times, as Zuko just easily broke the head of the spear with his forearms and then snatched it from Sokka, bonking him the head with the butt of the spear several times before knocking Sokka down. Sadly, Zuko doesn't have eyes behind his head, for if he did, he would have noticed that the boomerang came back, hitting him in the back of his head, knocking his helmet around his face in the process. After Zuko readjusted his helmet, he glared down at Sokka with balled fists and made two fire daggers form at the bottom of his fists. But, before he could do anything, Aang came out of nowhere as he slid from behind on top of a penguin and swept the firebender off his feet with using his staff, making Zuko land face first into the snow. With his butt in the air and his helmet landing on top of his ass, making him look like a jackass. Still sledding, Aang slid by the cheering children, covering them in snow in the process. The kids stopped their cheering, annoyed, but then started it up again, till Aang slid to a stop and was pushed off by the miffed penguin. "Hey Katara, hey Sokka," Aang greeted them, ignoring the firebenders completely. "Hi Aang, thanks for coming," Sokka thanked dryly. Zuko got up with snow on his face and turned around to face Aang as he went into his firebending stance, ready for battle. Aang adopted a serious look on his face and held his staff in front of him. They began to close in on him, but Aang acted quickly as he sent blasts of air to the men on right, and then sent a blast of air to the men on his left, and lastly, blasting Zuko as well, but he managed to hold his ground, shielding his face from the wind. "Looking for me?" asked Aang as he resumed his stance, circling each other. Zuko, realizing who he was, he looked at the bald kid incredulously. "You're the airbender?" Zuko asked. "You're the Avatar?" asked with clearly surprise in his voice, surprising the village as everyone's eyes widened. "Aang," Katara gasped. "No way," Sokka muttered. Zuko glared at Aang as they continued to circle each other. "I've spent years preparing for this encounter, training, meditating, but you're just child," Zuko shouted. Aang relaxed his stance. "Well, you're just a teenager," he said with a shrug. Zuko fired several blasts of fire at the airbender, but Aang countered as he twirled his staff in front of him. Some of the fire, however, reached over the villagers' heads, causing them to cry out in fear. Hearing their cries, Aang turned back toward the villagers and realized that if this continued, someone innocent could get hurt. "If I go with you, will you promise to leave everyone alone?" Aang asked, signifying his surrender. Zuko never had any intentions of harming anyone. Well, after seeing there were no threats, he wasn't above threatening and scaring women and children, but he wouldn't harm defenseless people. Zuko simply nodded and a soldier took his staff and Aang was led to the ship. Katara rushed forward. "No Aang, don't do this," she cried. Aang smiled at her. "Don't worry Katara, it'll be okay," he said, but impatiently was pushed forward. "Take care of Appa for me until I get back. Head a course to the Fire Nation." Zuko bellowed. "I'm going home," finished saying as he began to walk into the ship. Aang looked back at the tribe with a sad smile as the gangplank rose, his smile dropping further when he saw Katara's eyes began to water. He knew his decision to give himself up was best for the village, but after seeing Katara shed tears for him, he didn't felt as confident about his decision. The bowsprit completely shut and the ship started to depart. A few hours had passed since Aang was taken, and the mood of the villages was somber, for not only did they banish the Avatar from their village earlier, but they were also helpless when the Fire Nation took the world's last hope for peace. Now, ashamed, sad, and hopeless, the villagers wordlessly started repairing the village. Out by the water's edge, Katara stared at the horizon while Sokka was carrying some materials behind her. She has standing there for a while hoping to see Aang glide back laughing and unharmed. But a girl could only wait for so long, so she decided it was time to take action. "We have to go after that ship Sokka. Aang saved our tribe, now we have to save him," Katara declared. "Katara, why can't you realize that he's on our side? If we don't help him, no one will. I know you don't like Aang, but we owe him and Katara," Sokka yelled, tired of hearing his sister's rant. "Are you gonna talk all day or are you coming with me?" He gestured to a canoe all set to go. Katara gasped happily and hugged him. Sokka, I don't give him enough credit. Get in. We're going to save your boyfriend. Katara blushed, and began to rant at her brother. He's not my. Whatever. Sokka cut her off, shrugging his shoulders in indifference. What do you two think you're doing? Interrupted a voice. Surprised, they turned around to see Gran, giving them a stern look before smiling at them. You'll need these. You have a long journey ahead of you, she said while handing them a blue bundle, shocking the two teens. It's been so long since I've had hope, but you brought it back to life, my little waterbender. Gran hugged Katara, then turned to Sokka, and you, my brave warrior. Sokka stood tall, expecting some sort of praise. Be nice to your sister. Sokka deflated and barely returned his grandmother's hug. Yeah, okay Gran. Aang is the Avatar, he's the world's only chance. You both found him for a reason. Now your destinies are intertwined with his. Katara looked at the canoe and sweat dropped. Three's no way. We're gonna catch up to a warship with this, she said incredulously, and like a prayer answered from above, Appa appeared from over a hill with a roar. Appa! Exclaimed the waterbender as she ran happily towards the sky bison. You just love taking me out of my comfort zone, don't ya? Sokka deadpanned. Meanwhile, far away from the South Pole, at a Fire Nation naval base, a tall commander wearing the traditional Fire Nation uniform, his black hair was placed in a topknot and thick sideburns on both sides of his face, was in his office, standing, looking at the map that had the insignia of fire on almost every corner of the map as he stood in front of it, chuckling in arrogance. Soon, this war will be over and the Fire Nation will reign supreme, said the man, only to be interrupted by running steps coming from the corridor. Commander Zhao. A Fire Nation soldier rushed into the quarters, gasping for air as he saluted his higher-up. What is it? The commander turned towards his subordinate. Sir, the spy we have placed in the ship belonging to Prince Zuko has reported to us that the Avatar is indeed alive and seen at the Southern Water Tribe. Reported the soldier, narrowing his eyes. He glared at him. Are you sure? Only for the man to nod in affirmative. Turning back towards the map, the commander was contemplating on this new piece of information, and without turning, he gave his order. Take a fleet of 7 ships, and head towards the southern tribe to retrieve the Avatar, dead or alive. Slowly turning his eyes at the soldier, he continued, and if the villagers retaliate in capturing the Avatar, burn village to the ground. Sir, what if the prince intervenes? Asked the soldier. Zhao stayed quiet for a few minutes till a small smirk appeared on his face. If he interferes with the mission, then eliminate him as well. The soldier quietly saluted and went out his way to prepare for departure, leaving the commander by himself, chuckling darkly as he stared at the area that was the southern pole. On the deck of Zuko's ship, the prince and the Avatar faced each other while Aang was still captive and Zuko held his staff at hand. Inspecting it, this will make an excellent gift for my father. Then he looked at Aang. But I suppose you wouldn't know of fathers being raised by monks. Aang just glared at Zuko, watching as the scarred prince flanked the staff at his uncle as he stood guard along with his captors. Take the Avatar to the prison hold, and take this to my quarters, ordered Zuko as he walked away towards his quarters. Iroh just turned to the guard next to him and handed him the staff. Hey, you mind taking this to his quarters for me? It was more of a command than a question. Aang looked back at his staff as he was being led down to the lower levels of the ship. Aang looked at the guards, 1 in front, 2 behind him. Not a problem, he thought. So, I guess you never fought an airbender before. I bet I can take you all on with my hands tied behind my back. Silence, barked the guard. They reached a door and stopped for the lead guard to unlock it. Taking advantage while they were distracted, Aang took a deep breath and quickly exhaled, blowing a strong current of wind that slammed the guard in front of him into the door, knocking him out and sent him flying into the guard from behind, flying down the hallway as they landed on the stairs. The guard guarding his back took most of the brunt of the impact, and Aang hopped off and ran up deck. Once upstairs, Aang delivered a kick to send an air blast to the door, opening it as he dashed inside. The guard on the floor finally recovered and got up, dashing quickly upstairs, warning everyone. The Avatar has escaped. Find him, a guard yelled. Sokka sighed as he kept trying over and over again in making Appa fly, go, fly, soar, for the past 10 minutes since he and his sister had been riding on Appa, the flying bison. Sokka rolled his eyes in annoyance, more like Appa the normal bison. Please Appa, we need your help. Aang needs your help, said Katara as she sweet-talked to the bison. Meanwhile, Sokka continued to try, up, ascend, elevate. Katara shot Sokka a look. Sokka doesn't believe you can fly, but I do Appa. Reaching for his head, Katara rubbed his head gently. Come on, don't you want to save Aang? Appa groaned. Sokka then thought of something as he put his hand on his chin. What was it that kid said? He asked himself. Yee-haw, hup hup, wahoo, yip yip. And the saddle began to shake as Appa groaned and flapped his tail, slowly climbing into the sky. You did it Sokka, Katara cheered, but Sokka was even more excited. He's flying. He's flying, Katara he turned to his sister, but noticed Katara's smug look and calmed down. I mean, big deal, he's flying. He couldn't help but smile though. Aang ran down another hallway, constantly looking behind for any pursuers. Please don't let me run into anybody. Aang thought, but his luck wasn't as good as he turned the corner and ran into 3 guards. Damn it. Smiling weakly, Aang asked them, by chance have you seen my staff around? The response he got were spears raised at him. Using airbending to juice his speed, Aang ran past them, running along the walls, ceiling and underneath them. Thanks anyway, he called back. Dumbly, they looked at the trail of dust he left behind as their sweat dropped. Aang continued his search as he jumped into another hallway occupied by a firebender soldier. The soldier sent a blast of fire at him and in one swift move Aang jumped over the fire stream and the fire soldier, cutting the rope on his hands on one of the spikes on his helmet on mid-air, knocking the soldier by bringing him down. Aang looked in several rooms in search of his staff, opening door after door, till he finally reached into another room and cringed when he saw it was occupied. He relaxed slightly when he realized the old man was asleep and gently shut the door while quietly apologizing to the sleeping man. Checking the few more rooms that were left, but in his haste to get out, Aang almost passed an open room that held what he was looking for. Too bad he didn't know it was a trap as the door was shut by the prince himself just as Aang had turned around to walk out of the room, staring into the eyes of an angry Zuko who got into his stance. Looks like I underestimated you, was all Zuko said before letting loose several blasts of fire. Aang dodged around. Rolling into a corner, Aang tried to catch his breath but was forced to dodge more fireballs as he rolled under Zuko, getting behind him and barely putting one hand faced up on the prince's back, circle walking to stay behind Zuko. Zuko growled as he was unable to land any hits and jumped away to get some distance. Close combat isn't gonna work, he thought, so he fired more blasts to maintain a distance, but Aang bent the air away from the fire, making the flames die out. Dodging another fire blast, Aang jumped into the air and formed an air scooter, riding all around the room dodging every blast that Prince sent, frustrating him even further, until the prince sent a kick into the airball and dispersed it, send Aang into the wall. Getting up in a defense stance, Aang looked around the room in order to use against the prince, and noticed the mattress laying next to Zuko, and with airbending Aang slammed the mattress, along with Zuko, into the wall and then into the ceiling, allowing the airbender a chance to escape. Once Zuko has landed on the ground, he looked up only to find the Avatar gone. Opening the hatch to the bridge, Aang poked his head out to see if the coast was clear. There was the helmsman, but beyond him was his way out to freedom. Rushing through the room to jump out from the observation deck, Aang opened his glider as he was in mid-air. Unfortunately, Zuko was very stubborn as he wasn't done with him as he jumped off the observation deck as well and grabbed onto Aang's foot. Aang, being unable to support the weight of he and Zuko, went crashing down into the deck. Slowly both of them got up and resumed their stance, ready to renew their battle, only to hear a growl from a distance took their attention away from each other and looked up. What is that? Zuko asked out loud. Appa, Aang exclaimed. Noticing as the bison got closer, he was able to make out Katara and Sokka in Appa's saddle. With his distraction with Appa, Zuko took advantage as he almost roasted Aang with a fire blast, but Aang was able to narrowly block the blast by twirling his staff and jumped back to avoid another blast and almost fell overboard. Zuko kept firing several blasts of fire at him. One of the blasts managed to knock Aang's staff away from him. Having no choice, Aang jumped out the way of another blast of fire and landed on the rail, not noticing Zuko kicking one more ball of fire at him, and this time the airbender wasn't able to dodge it in time as he was sent over the rail and into the water unconscious. Aang! No! Katara cried. Aang was the Avatar. He was supposed to bring peace to the world, not die like this. Aang! Beside her, Sokka looked equally shocked. He may have not liked the kid that much, but he still didn't deserve that. He saved our village, and he lost his life doing it. No one should have to die that young. Zuko's eyes widened when the boy fell overboard. That wasn't supposed to happen. He was supposed to capture the Avatar, not kill him. Not everything was fruitless. Even if he told his father that he killed the Avatar, he doubted his father would believe him and let him back home, making Zuko tremble in rage. Aang, in his unconscious state, could feel he was in water but couldn't do anything about it. He felt tired and numb. Aang! No! Katara! That's right, she was on Appa. Aang! She's still in danger. Aang! Panic rose in Aang, and then it happened. Aang snapped his eyes open, and the arrow tattoos along with his eyes began to glow white. Back at Sokka and Katara's home, the tattoos of the man began to glow inside the pillar, shining brightly through the ice as it caught the attention of every person in the village. What are you? Thought Gran as she stared from the entrance of her hut. Fully awake, the Avatar began to swim back to the surface as he twirled his body around, surrounding himself in a whirlpool. At the surface, everyone jumped in surprise as a cyclone of water shot out of the sea, and at the top was Aang with his eyes and tattoos glowing, looking directly at Zuko as he looked back at Aang in fear as he towered over the ship. Landing on deck, Aang moved his hands around, bending the water to form a circular shield around him, unleashing it on everyone on the ship, knocking the soldiers away and Zuko out of the ship. Watching from Appa's saddle, Sokka and Katara looked on in shock. Did you see what they just did? Katara squeaked. Now that was some waterbending, Sokka exclaimed exhausted. Aang collapsed from using the Avatar state. Once Appa landed close to Aang, Katara jumped off and rushed over towards Aang. Katara shook Aang as she sat him up. Aang, are you all right? Aang groaned and looked at the gathered people. Hey Katara, hey Sokka, thanks for coming. He smiled tiredly. Sokka smirked. Well, I couldn't let you hog all the glory. Realizing that he was empty-handed, Aang looked towards his right. I dropped my staff. I'll get it. Sokka volunteered and ran off to get the staff, but just as Sokka picked it up, another hand grabbed it, freaking him out as he looked up and realizes that it was Zuko. Growling, Sokka tries to pull it away, but Zuko wouldn't let go, and after a short game tug-o-war battle for the staff, Sokka decided to get payback and used the staff to poke Zuko in the head, in the same way Zuko did to him back at his village, making Zuko lose his grip, almost falling into the water but managed to grab on to the anchor chain. That's from the Water Tribe, Sokka yelled triumphantly. Katara just finished helping Aang jump onto Appa when she saw the guards advance towards them. Moving her hands up, she pulled a stream of water from the puddles on the deck, scaring the guards a bit in an attempt to try to do what Aang just did. She flung her arms forward, but the water flew backwards and the water behind her froze. Katara! She heard Sokka yell. Turning back, she looked behind her and saw that she froze her brother's feet to the ship. The soldiers, feeling confident, continued in their advance, thinking she was no threat. Katara turned around and repeated what she just did, hoping for the same results. The sound of water freezing was heard. She turned around and gave a mental cheer at her handiwork. The soldiers were frozen in place with their hands out. Katara climbed on Appa and shouted at her brother, "Hurry up, Sokka." Sokka was chipping away the ice around his feet with his boomerang. "It's your fault that I'm stuck. I didn't ask for all this flying and magic." I'm just a guy with a boomerang. He got himself free and ran up Appa's tail. Yip yip. Yip yip. Sokka cried. Iroh came out half-dazed as he still was rubbing his eyes and fully awakened when he saw the giant mammal fly into the air. Huh? He said as he surveyed the chaos on the deck. The unconscious firebenders, the frozen guards, and his nephew struggling to get back on board. Rushing quickly towards his nephew, helping Zuko get back on the deck. Shoot them down, ordered Zuko, but everyone was incapacitated, leaving it up to Iroh and Zuko, as they went through a series of turns and launched a large ball of fire at Appa. Noticing the giant ember coming straight at them, Aang jumped to the back of the saddle and with a swing of his staff he released an arc of wind that deflected the fireball into an ice cliff, causing a large amount of ice fell on the ship and thus, preventing it from going any further. The kids laughed in success as they got away. Zuko glared at them, then at the snow. Good news for the Fire Lord, the nation's greatest threat is just a child, Iroh commented. Zuko just glared at the retreating form of the bison as the Avatar continued to fly away. I don't know how that's possible and I don't know if that makes my task easier or harder, but I know I won't underestimate him again. Dig this ship out and follow them, ordered the prince as he turned to his crew. But sweat dropped when he saw that half were frozen and the other half was thawing them out with small flames. As soon as you're finished with that, he finished lamely, looking back at the horizon. The sun was setting and they were still flying quietly on Appa. Katara decided now was the time to ask questions. Aang was sort of sulking as he held his knees close to his chest. How did you do that? She asked while scooting closer to Aang. With the water. It was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Aang looked sideways at her. I don't know. I just sort of did it. The two stayed silent for a while, till Katara asked questions again. Why didn't you tell us you were the Avatar? Because, I never wanted to be, was his reply, looking away. But Aang, Katara continued, the world's been waiting for the Avatar to return and end the war. Aang looked down, sulking even further, and how am I supposed to do that? Well, according to legend, you first need to master water, then earth, then fire, right? That's what the monks told me. Well, if you go to the North Pole, you can master waterbending. Smiling, Aang said, we can learn it together. Katara turned to look at her brother, and you're still coming, right? There'll be plenty of firebender heads to knock on the way, she said in a sing-song voice. Sokka smiled a bit. I'd like that. I'd really like that. Then we're in this together, Katara declared. All right, but before I learn waterbending, we have some serious business to attend to. Aang pulled out and opened a map. Here, here, and here. He pointed to several places. What's there? Katara asked. Here we'll ride the hopping llamas. Then way over here we'll surf on the backs of giant koi fish. Then back over here we'll ride the hog monkeys. They don't like people riding them, but that's what makes it fun. Aang smiled brightly at them. The siblings looked at each other, then back at the map, then at Aang, then back at each other. Sounds cool, said Sokka, shrugging his shoulders as he leaned back against the saddle and drifted off to sleep. Turning back towards the direction of the southern water tribe, Katara could not help but feel a sense of dread on the pit of her stomach, a feeling that kept growing stronger and stronger the further they flew away. I hope everyone stays safe, thought Katara worriedly. 2 weeks have passed since the Avatar had awakened from his slumber and journeyed towards the North Pole in order to master waterbending, but not before he made a pit stop at the Southern Air Temple, his home that he had not seen for a century. The siblings didn't know how to break it to him that the airbenders had been eradicated and that he was the last one, but for his sake, they pretended to ignore the reality that awaited him as Aang continued to show them around his home. Meanwhile, at the South Pole a small fleet of 7 Fire Nation fleets approached their destination as they broke through the ice, the fall of black snow announcing their arrival. Children were playing in the snow, laughing and giggling as they threw snowballs at each other. One little girl was hiding behind the pillar as she kneeled down and scooped a bit of snow in her hand, gently cupping it into a ball till out of nowhere, a black flake landed on the ball. Huh? Said the little girl as she looked up and saw a small hail of black snow befallen the village. The villagers stopped their activities as they too noticed the black ashes, and grew afraid, for when black snow fell, it only meant that the fire navy was nearby, and began to run into hiding. Gran felt an intense heat coming from above. Looking up, she saw that the Fire Nation begun their attack as they catapulted their boulders of fire, crashing into the village as it destroyed anything in its path, demolishing homes, supplies and the beam itself as it crumbled and landed on the ground with thunderous thud, while two of the Navy ships came crashing through the walls of the village, and quickly lowered the bowsprit. Firebenders marched down the plank and rounded the villagers near the destroyed pillar, threatening them to kill them if they tried anything. The captain of the fleet walked in front of the villagers, staring impassively at the group. "I'm simply going to ask you once, fail to cooperate, and I'll destroy this village," informed the captain to their captives, watching as they shook genuine fear. "Where is the Avatar? I know he has been hiding in this place," demanded the captain. "He left the village already," a young woman replied with evident fear in her voice, but her only response was a blast of flames hitting and scorching the tent next to her to the ground, scaring the children as they began to cry in the arms of their mothers while they were shielded by said parent. Gran watched with fear at the burning tent as she slowly backed away from the fire till she hit something solid. Turning around, she saw that she had backed up into what was left of the ice pillar, but surprisingly, the chamber where the person was held was still intact without damage. Dropping to her knees, the elderly woman placed her hands on top of the ice and pleaded with her life, "Please, save us, don't let the children of this village die in cold blood," Gran cried in her mind as she lowered her head. Back at the southern temple, Aang was chasing a lemur through the temple as he came down from the hill and walked through a tarp, suddenly slowing his chase as he did not expect to see what the room contained. Gasping in shock as he found the remains of many firebenders, lying across the room, half buried in snow inside the room. Firebenders? They were here? Muttered the young Avatar. Aang inspected the room further as he walked further down, and stopped completely as his body was frozen numbed and breath caught in his throat. In the back of the room, illuminated by what little sunlight passed through, was the skeleton of an airbender monk. The robes of the air nomad were old and damaged as they were covered in dried blood, but what shocked him to the very core was that he knew who this corpse belonged to, for he could immediately identify the specific wooden necklace that hanged around the neck of the corpse. "Gyatso," muttered Aang as he fell to his knees and began to sob. Grief, anger, sadness, guilt, rage, and hopelessness raged wildly throughout his body as he cried for the death of his people. Running footsteps were approaching as the person came through the curtains, revealing Sokka as he claimed that he would not eat the lemur, only to notice that Aang had finally discovered the truth of his people's demise. Feeling sorry for the kid, the warrior slowly walked towards the grieving boy. "I'm sorry, Aang, but everything will be all right. Come on, let's get out of here," Sokka said softly as he placed a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder, but in his rage, Aang's tattoos started to glow as he tapped into the Avatar state, causing Sokka to gasp as he was sent back by the air currents that Aang had unleashed, forming a dome of air around him as he slowly levitated off the ground. Sokka slowly got up as he held on and recoiled at the sight of his friend. Around the rest corners of the world where a temple of the Avatar was located, a miracle began to happen as each statue or murals of the Avatar began to react to Aang's anger. In an Earth Kingdom temple, a priest was praying in front of a mural of several of the most famous Earth Kingdom Avatar, including Kyoshi. When their eyes started to glow gold at the North Pole, the water shamans and its people of the Northern Water Tribe watched as a blue light began to flare brightly above the temple. At the Fire Temple in the Crescent Moon Island, the fire sages stared at the statue of Avatar Roku, watching as his eyes glow, making some of them grow amazed, confused, frightened, and, for a few, hopeful. "Send word to the Fire Lord immediately, the Avatar has returned," ordered the oldest of the sages, bringing hopes of peace as the statues of previous avatars continued to glow. Back at the South Pole, Gran still held her hands onto the ice, in hopes that the person or spirit within had heard her prayer, but the captain's patience had finally worn out. "You all refuse to speak, asked the captain again, and no one dared to speak. "So be it. By the decree of Fire Lord Ozai, I sentence each and every one of you to death," shouted the captain as the firebenders rounded and cornered the villagers, getting into their stances, forming embers in their hands as they prepared to unleash all of their fire. "Soldiers, exterminate them." At their order, everything began to go in slow motion as they shoot currents of flames at the villagers, causing the mothers to shield their children from harm, the screams filling the air as they closed their eyes. Gran slowly looked up as she resigned to her fate and stared into the ice, looking directly at the person within, only to catch her breath in her throat as the person's eyes snapped open and began to glow a deep crimson. Tattoos on his arms and chest appeared with the glow, and everything began to tremble as the ice began to slowly break till it finally shattered completely, sending a shockwave so strong that it disperses the oncoming flames and sent the firebenders back, while the captain and everyone else shielded their eyes as it spread out throughout the village, while a beam of light coursed to the sky, illuminating it with its crimson glow. At the land of the Fire Nation, inside a massive volcano, resided a small city with a palace in the middle, and on a balcony that was on top of the palace, a raven-haired firebender wearing a black robe with the insignia of a golden flame in the front stood, staring passively at the direction of the South Pole, smirking darkly as he barely felt the rise of power due to the distance. "After 10,000 years, you're still as powerful, Namikaze," thought the man in silence, watching as the sky in the South Pole turned crimson from afar. "So after many centuries have passed, you have finally awakened," muttered the man as his eyes changed color from black to red with a ring around the iris, holding 3 tomos in each eye. As the light began to dim till it finally disappeared, the captain and Gran turned forward while slowly uncovering their eyes till they were able to focus their eyesight to catch a glimpse of who or what radiated such power, and when they both saw the source of such power, they stared in shock at the being that was in front of them. A tall, fair-skinned male that looked to be on his early 20s, with his eyes shadowed by his spiky blonde hair and jaw-length bangs framing either side of his face, stood in between the villagers and the firebenders. Wearing torn white pants with black metal bracers on the arms and legs with matching color shoes, but what had the village's elder captivated were the weird tattoos that framed the young man's body. A double-headed arrow pointing downward on his chest with 2 small lines going downward on the sides of his pectorals. A small circle on each shoulder with a scoop underneath it, and a spiral tattoo on each forearm, starting from his wrist to halfway up his forearm, all giving a crimson glow. But no matter what, she could not take off her eyes away from the boy's back. 4 dragons tangled with each other, looking as if they were ascending upwards, were etched on his back as they also gave a crimson glow. And realization hit her as to who he was. "It can't be," muttered Kana as she stepped back in shock. "Who are you?" demanded the captain as he got ready into his stance with his left hand forward within a chop position, while his right hand was held in a closed fist cocked close to his frame as he readied himself to attack the unknown intruder, his underlings following suit. The blonde-haired man just barely raised his head and glared intensely at them, scaring them as they stared into his slitted eyes with red irises. TBC, Book 1 Chapter 3. Thank you everyone for the reviews, but before we head into the chapter, there's a couple of things I would like to clarify from the previous chapter and for the coming chapters. I waited till the end of the chapter for Naruto to appear due to the series when Aang grieves for his people. Anything related to the Avatar begins to glow, and Naruto, being the father of the very first Avatar of the cycle, should be affected as well, and causing him to awaken from his slumber. As for when meets the gang, well, I cannot tell you, for that would spoil the story. My apologies. Azula is a wild card as of this moment, but I do have my own plans for her, and everything will be revealed in due time. Explanation at the end of the chapter every time this is posted. Disclaimers. I don't own Naruto or Avatar, The Last Airbender. Previously on Avatar of the 4 Dragons, Naruto clashed both of his fists together and caused a tornado to form underwater, and tried to separate the water, but it backfired as the water itself began to freeze around him. The captain that found the iceberg theorized that the person inside the ice was the one that started the cycle and brought bending to the world, due to the strange and glowing crimson patterns he described according to legend. Wait, what legend? And by what you mean, the one who started the cycle? Asked a now confused Aang, scratching his head. She refers to the Crimson Avatar, clarified Katara, also known as the Avatar of 4 Dragons. The blonde-haired man just barely raised his head and glared intensely at them, scaring them as they stared into his slitted eyes with red irises. Rebirth of a legend. The wrath of a dragon. The captain, along with his forces, continued to glare at the person that was in front of them, raw red energy dancing around him like a cloak with his markings glowing like a hot sun. Unnerving them, scaring them as the intruder continued to glare at them with those glowing, blood-red eyes, seeing the raw power that was ready to be unleashed through those eyes. But suddenly, the cloak that surrounded him disappeared as the blonde man slowly fell to one knee, trying to support himself with his left hand placed onto the snowed ground. Panting hard as he felt disoriented, the tattoos stopped their glow, becoming nothing more than black markings on his body. Then the gears inside his head began to turn as the captain remembered that the unknown person had just escaped from his frozen prison, and his body wasn't accustomed just yet to moving on his own, making this the perfect chance to attack since the intruder wouldn't have a chance of defeating him, especially when he had more than 200 men with him. There was no possible way he could be defeated. "He's weak. Attack!" shouted the captain as he shot both his hands forward, along with his army as they launched large current of flames at the man and the villagers, mixing in the end as it became one giant fire blast. Seeing the flame heading straight at them, the villagers screamed as they scooted closer to each other, fearing for their lives as the inferno kept getting closer and closer, crying as they pleaded for the man to save them, but he just stayed keeled, unresponsive. The same little girl that was saddened when Aang left the village, sprouted her head out of her mother's arms and shouted at the man. "Mister! Watch out! Where am I and why is everything so damn foggy?" thought Naruto, still feeling disoriented after breaking free, and tried to stand up but his body felt heavy and unresponsive. What's going on? Then slowly everything started to come back to him. I remember now. Sasuke threatened to destroy the village as he launched an attack. I foiled his plan by destroying his forces and chased him towards the Valley of the End. We fought and caused a big explosion, and then, nothing, thought Naruto as he clutched his face in frustration with his right hand as he forced his mind in trying to remember, but nothing came. "Mister! Watch out!" A voice suddenly called out to him, causing to look up as his vision finally cleared up only to see a giant flame heading straight at him and the people behind him, watching the flames just be a few feet away from him. With the flames just being a few feet away, the blonde rapidly jumped to his feet to intercept the raging flames as he shot his hand forward with an open palm, with his legs apart in order to get a better route into the ground, parting the flames at the middle, only to cause them to go around and on top of them as it engulfed them, causing everyone to scream in sheer fright as the villagers saw the fire encircling them, entrapping them a big dome of fire. Smirking, the captain believed everyone to be dead as he watched the flames dance around in the dome. Within the fire dome, everyone was looking with astonishment and fear as they saw that the fire had not touched them and the man that blocked the attack was, in fact, controlling the fire itself as he waved his hands around while taking deep breaths with his eyes closed. And then he suddenly stopped the rhythm of his hands as he stood still with his hands closed together in a prayer in front of his chest and exhaled the air he held inside his lungs while bringing his hands down slowly till his hands were facing palm down, and the unthinkable happened as the villagers of the water tribe witnessed. With their own eyes the fire began to change colors from orange, red to pure white, the heat becoming more intense than regular as the villagers began to sweat, cringing even more. Sensing their fear, Naruto turned towards them and smiled softly. "Don't be afraid, I won't harm you," he said softly, "trust me." The villagers were skeptical of him, sure he saved them from being scorched from the dome itself, but he was still a firebender, and firebenders were never to be trusted. "Trust him, we must." "Harm us, he will not," said Gran to the villagers, shocking them completely, for they know that she lost a best friend and a daughter to the Fire Nation, and yet, she's asking them to trust him. "But elder, he's a firebender," screamed a teenage girl as she glared hatefully at Naruto. They're the cause of this war and lost so many loved ones. War. I thought I abolished the forthcomings of war when I killed Madara and ended the Fourth Great War, thought Naruto confusedly, but was brought out of his thoughts when the elder spoke again. No, child, he's not a firebender entirely. Now this had confused them completely. How could he not be a firebender if he was bending the fire to his will? I'll explain everything later, but just trust him like I have learned to trust him, said Gran to her fellow villagers till she finally faced Naruto. We're in your hands. Naruto just simply nodded his head in acknowledgement, and resumed his pose as he started to concentrate it again, his tattoos beginning to glow once again as he folded both of his arms in front of him, left arm over his right, and slowly broke them apart, one going up and the other going down, doing a circular motion with arms while his hands were open-palmed, slowly parting the dome horizontally. While slowly, Naruto began to deeply inhale the flames. Seeing no signs of the villagers surviving the assault, the captain turned back to his vassal. Men, let's head back to base, the captain ordered his men as he barely took the first step, only to stop once he felt a heat far more intense than a regular flame could make, his shadow being more defined by a bright flare. Turning around, he gasped in shock when saw the dome had changed color. White flames. How is this possible? Thought the captain in astonishment as he and every firebender took a step back in fright as they witnessed the fire began to flare up even more as the dome was being opened from the middle, revealing this monster that survived their most powerful attacks, and waved it off as if it were nothing as he now had completely parted the dome and slowly inhaled the flames till none of them remained, making his body turn red from the intense heat his body contained within, the ice and snow around him melting at a fast rate as he just stood there, unharmed and unscathed, with the villagers behind him, very much alive as well. What the hell are you? Shouted the captain in fear and anger, but his only reply was a glare before the blonde reared his head back as he brought his right hand up close to his mouth, and brought his head back forth, exhaling the fire in a giant torrent of white flames from his mouth directly at the small army of firebenders. Some tried to disperse it away but found out that they could not bend the flame, and were engulfed by the fire. At the last minute, the captain jumped to the side with only his left leg being lit aflame. Gritting his teeth at the exhilarating pain he felt on his leg, the captain barely turned back only to see most of his crew being cremated by the fire as it kept surging forward towards the two naval fleets, hitting them dead on as it created a large explosion, killing every man that was inside those ships in the process, only to leave nothing but a pile of burnt skeletons with their flesh burnt to the bone and melted, burnt steel after the fire had dispersed and, with a scorched trail within the village. Naruto then turned his attention at the remaining ships that afloat afar the tribe, while the villagers just stared in shock at the power this man possessed, making Gran confirm her theory as to who he was. He is real, thought the elder as she stared at the man's back. The avatar of 4 dragons does exist. Terrified the captain was, as he had felt firsthand the power of this demon, and hastily, he bended a small ember in his hand and launched it into the air, making it explode as it reached a certain height to signify his naval fleet to launch an all-out assault. On one of the navy ships, a helmsman using his binoculars watched the whole ordeal through the cockpit, watching in disbelief as one man just obliterated a small army of firebenders without struggle. Desperately, he looked for survivors only to spot the captain clinching his leg as he gathered fire in his hand and shot it upward, making it ignite. Watching the flare in the sky, he knew what the captain had ordered, and grabbing the microphone on his right, he pressed the button and gave the signal. Everyone to your posts, attack with everything and obliterate the village. At this command, every firebender at every ship came up deck and prepared to launch an all-out attack as they prepared the boulders covered in oil on the catapults and ignited them with fire, simultaneously catapulting the ignited boulders towards the village. The villagers saw the rest of the ships began to showering them with flaming boulders, making them cringe in fear, but Naruto just simply looked up into the sky and saw the incoming boulders. He slowly brought his hand up and brought down fast to his stomach, smacking it hard, causing Naruto to open his mouth and shot compressed air bullets at the flaming boulder, demolishing it in mid-air as they made impact, and continued to shoot the air bullets for a while till he saw they were launching more and more boulders at them. Damn it. They sure are becoming a pain in the ass, thought Naruto as he ceased smacking his abdomen and jumped up front in a twisting motion with both his hands forward clapped together, launching a powerful gale into the sky, tearing to pieces any boulder that was caught in its path, but some still managed to pass through as they were still heading towards the village. Wasting no time, Naruto dispersed the gale and reached into the snowed ground with his palms and brought his hands up as he crossed them in the air, with his palms still open, bending the water and snow to hover above them, covering the entire village in a bigger dome made of crystal ice, and concentrated in managing to maintain it together as the boulders impacted it, with only managing to crack it on a few parts of the dome. The villagers were now flabbergasted as this man not only did know firebending, he also knows airbending and waterbending. Hope slowly beginning to fill within them as they began to believe him to be the true Avatar instead of that kid that came to their village, but some were still skeptical about it. But I thought only the Avatar was the only one capable to mastering all four elements, muttered the same young girl that accused Naruto of being a firebender as she saw him bend the water above the village and covering them with a giant dome. Child, the young girl turned back to look at Gran, who hadn't taken her sights off the young man. He can bend all four elements as well, for he is the Avatar as well, clarified the elder as the girl gained a look of shock on her face as she turned her attention back at Naruto. The helmsman that had ordered the attack against the village shook in disbelief as he saw the same man that destroyed the two fleets was now destroying some of the boulders with airballs, only for him to order everyone to launch a massive attack, believing that man could not destroy all of them at once. But he was proven wrong when he saw the man jump with his hands extended forward and sending a massive gust of wind at the boulders, demolishing most of them, but with some ignited boulders still headed towards their target. Now let's see you block those in time, sneered the man in his mind, believing the blonde had no chance to save the village in time, only to have his eyes widen even further as a giant dome of ice rose over the village and protect it from the rest of their attacks. Impossible, thought the helmsman as he now shook in fear, not knowing how close they were to awakening the sleeping dragon. Within, I'm growing tired of these bastards, muttered Naruto annoyed. While still holding the dome in place, Naruto quickly kneeled down and twisted his upper body to the left while moving his arms in a circle upward, maintaining his hands upward as he stood up again with his left leg slightly forward while putting some of his weight on his right. The dome began to dissolve as it slowly uncovered the valley and moved forward, standing as a 50 feet tall tidal wave in front of the village, and slowly, Naruto then brought both his hands to each side while barely lifting them up with his hands opened, and his left leg up with the tip of his toes barely touching the ground while still raising his arms up as it caused the tidal wave to grow taller and wider till it finally stood 60 feet tall. Slowly bringing his elbows down close to his abdomen, with his palms facing forward as he took a deep breath, till he pushed forward as he sent both his arms out and leaned his body's weight on his left leg while exhaling his breath. Ah! Shouted Naruto as he pushed the tidal wave, sending it straight at the rest of the fleet's direction, causing a giant roar as the water rushed forward as it crashed on the icebergs along the way. The messenger that was in the cockpit with the helmsman quickly wrote down everything that happened and rushed towards the messenger eagle that nested on its cage near the door, causing the bird to squeak in pain as the messenger grabbed it roughly. Attaching the note onto its leg, the man ran to window and let the bird fly back towards their naval base, while the helmsman watched helplessly as the massive tidal wave came at them, crushing the ice that stood in its way as it came forward at them, engulfing the first few ships as it tore them up in its waters. Spirits, what have we unleashed? Whispered the helmsman till the wave had finally hit and crushed his ship as it was being sent at the depths of the ocean. While still holding his stance, Naruto just stood there as he watched the wave kept going and going as it slowly began to die down till it finally dispersed into the water, and slowly he slipped out his stance while his tattoos began to stop their crimson glow till they completely disappeared from his body while the villagers just kept staring in awe at the power he displayed. The kids being the first to get out of the surprised expressions as they ran out of their parents' arms towards Naruto, clamping their tiny arms onto his legs as they cheered him. That was cool. Do it again, you, awesome. Naruto just chuckled as he looked down at the group of children that surrounded him, placing his hand on top of the little girl's head that was clenching on his leg and simply ruffled her hair. The little girl looked up with small fear still being in her eyes. Are the bad people gone now? Naruto kneeled in front of her with his hand till on top of her head and smiled softly. Yes, little one, the bad people will no longer disturb you. If this a small fraction of his power, then I can see how he single-handedly ended the wars and brought peace to the lands, thought Gran as she watched the destruction left by the Avtar. But turning back towards Naruto, she couldn't help but smile as she watched him interact kindly with the children, and I can see why peace lasted long under his reign. Suddenly Naruto gained a serious look in his eyes, and quickly stood up while turning. I see you managed to survive, said the blonde Avtar as he glared at the captain, who was struggling as he used a bar of wood as a crutch to stand, scaring the villagers as he bended fire on his fist. I suggest you surrender and I assure you, no harm will befall you, said Naruto calmly while still maintaining his guard, but it only infatuated the crippled captain even further in rage. I will not surrender to a coward that disappeared for over a century instead of dying along with every freakign heir. Nomad, shouted the captain in anger as he cocked his hand back, causing Naruto to narrow his eyes at this revelation, but still couldn't feel bothered when he said he had disappeared for over a century. Have I really been frozen for that long? Pondered Naruto in his mind, but could not think about it much for he saw the captain about to launch an attack and the blonde suddenly disappeared out of thin air, surprising everyone as he reappeared in front of the captain with his hand grasping his skull, and used his leg to sweep the captain's leg from behind and pushed him down to the ground, raising his right hand lightly up as he froze the firebender's hands to the ground. The captain continued to struggle to break free, but Naruto kept a strong grip on his skull. Now let's see what has happened during this past century, muttered Naruto as he closed his eyes and his tattoos began to glow softly along with the captain's eyes as he finally stopped struggling. Inside his mind, Naruto was able to see every atrocity the captain made in the name of the Fire Nation, burning villages to the ground as he and his army passed through the lands, killing without mercy those who had surrendered willingly, ruling over conquering villages with an iron fist as he taxed them severely, separating families and causing orphans. But one memory that sickened him the most was when he saw the memory of a young pregnant teen being burned alive by the captain, giving her a slowly and painful. He also saw the lecture as to how Fire Lord Sozin exterminated the Air Nation without warning by killing men, women and children, old and young, and him watching with anticipation at the lesson. At each passing memory, he could hear the screams of despair of each person he came across. He could hear the pleas of mercy but arrogantly, he slaughtered them without a thought. He could hear the cries of children as they cried for their dead parents to get up, not to leave them, but stayed unresponsive. With each vision that flashed through his mind, it made him get angrier and angrier by the minute, as his tattoos were now fully glowing. His canine teeth had now become fangs and his fingernails had grown into claws, and his eyes snapped open, glowing crimson as he glared into the eyes of the captain. The captain getting scared for his life as he now had regained control of his body and could feel the anger raging within. He pleaded to Naruto, I promise to repent for my crimes. BBU but PPLE please, spare me. But only managed to anger the blonde even further. You dare ask for mercy when you gave your enemies none after they had surrendered, shouted an enraged and livid Naruto at the man, beginning to squeeze the man's skull as you could hear the bone beginning to crack. I will give you the same mercy you delivered to those you slaughter, and slowly white flames began to erupt from his body, scorching the captain's face slowly as smoke began to pour between Naruto's fingers. That is until Naruto unleashed the raging inferno, setting the captain aflame as he began to scream on top of his lungs for he could not stand the pain of his limbs being burnt. But Naruto simply unleashed more fire, causing the villagers to step back as they tried to cover themselves from the inferno, until the captain was turned to ash, with his screams echoing throughout the village. With the smell of burnt flesh flowing through the air while Naruto just stayed kneeled with his hand still extended forward with the fire still licking his body, while he was in a trance. However, unknown to the villagers, an astral form of a dragon appeared from underneath the ground as it used its claws to grasp onto his shoulders and pulled out Naruto's spirit out of his body as they flew into the distance. "What the hell?" demanded Naruto as he looked around till he finally looked down and saw his physical body being left behind, and looked up to see a dragon had a hold of him as they continued to fly away. "Let me go, you oversized lizard," shouted Naruto as he struggled to break free, but the dragon didn't budge as it kept flying on top of a mountain, its peak residing high in the skies where the sun gave an orange glow. Once the dragon reached the top of the mountain, the dragon released Naruto not so gracefully a few feet off the ground, but the blonde twisted his body in mid-air and managed to land on his feet while glaring at the dragon that had landed on top of a hill, passively staring down at Naruto. "It's a pleasure to finally meet the avatar that brought bending to the world through his 4 students." Naruto turned around to see the person that had spoken, but found that said person wasn't alone, for he had 3 more companions with him, each of them staring down at him indifferently as they stood on the edge of the hill. "Who are you? Why was I brought here? And where in the hell is here?" demanded Naruto as he got in his earth-bending stance, but to his shock he found that he could not use bending as he tried to bend the earth to grasp the 4 intruders that were in front of him. "Relax, young one. We are not your enemies," stated an old man wearing robes that were red with black lining. He had armbands made of some blue fabric and had a long beard of white, with his hair being white as well, with some sort of crown there on his head. His face was showing a good deal of old age, but his eyes were what made him stop, amber eyes that were hardened by battle experience, further telling the former shinobi that this man wasn't someone to be trifled with when angered, despite his kind and calm demeanor. "And as to who am I, I'm Avatar Roku, the predecessor of the previous reincarnated avatar, and the rest of my companions are the previous avatars before me. This is Avatar Kyoshi," the old man now known as Roku signaled with has to a fairly tall woman with long brown hair that was tied at the end of her hair, wearing a long green kimono with a grass green shirt above the kimono, and a light green vest on top with combat boots and matching color gloves. White war paint adorned her face with red paint on top of her eyebrows and a mock crown on her head. Simply nodded her head at him in acknowledgement. "And this is Avatar Karuk," then a bearded man, wearing the traditional water tribe clothing, wearing the hide of a sea lion, stepped forward. He too nodded his head at the blonde. "And lastly, this is Avatar Yanshin, a fairly good-looking woman with a blue arrow on her forehead, wearing air nomad robes with a wooden necklace around her neck, simply bowed in respect at the avatar in front of her. We and every reincarnated avatar before us have maintained the balance between the 4 nations since your absence, and your son, the first avatar, took the mantle of Keeper of Balance more than 10,000 years ago," said Avatar Roku to Naruto, who just stood dumbfounded on his spot. "10,000 years ago," exclaimed the blonde as he fell on his knees, and Roku just nodded his head sadly in confirmation. 1010 was the only name that kept repeating on his mind, for the thought of his wife living while believing that her husband was dead, and the pain she must have felt every day of her life as she raised their son by herself, and that ate him from the inside out, and the hopes of seeing her were just thrown out the window, along with chances of being there for his son, and watch him as he grows to become an adult, shattering his will as his eyes lost their spark for life. Yanshin felt saddened as she saw the man before her become nothing but a shell and jumped down and landed softly next to Naruto, kneeling in front of him, and gently cupped his cheeks in her hands, making him look up into her eyes. "Father," started the airbender, causing Naruto to widen his eyes in mild surprise. "Don't blame yourself for what happened long ago. You did your duty knowing the risks and consequences in order to protect those you held dear in your heart, and yes, you're our father, for we are reincarnations of your son, Raizen, since we are part of the cycle that began when Raizen awoken the avatar state at birth," Yanshin said softly to Naruto as she slowly embraced him. "I hate to interrupt and be the bearer of bad news," Avatar Karuk suddenly said as he landed a few feet away from the two, with Kyoshi and Roku in tow. But we seek your help once again in order to stop the war that has been destroying this world, said Kiyoshi as she walked towards the blonde who still hadn't moved a muscle, causing Kiyoshi to give a disgusted look towards him. If you truly are the avatar of 4 dragons, then I'm truly not impressed, ranted the former avatar from the Earth Nation. Shocking the rest of the group, I used to hear tales of how you single-handedly stopped a raging war that had engulfed the lands in a river of blood many centuries ago by fighting and killing an immortal that had the abilities to control the powerful of demons. But I fear the tales were exaggerated if you are nothing but a fucking coward that hid himself in a pillar of ice. Kiyoshi finished her rant as she glared at Naruto. Yanshin was about to protest at Kiyoshi's words, but a hand on her shoulder suddenly stopped her and turned towards Naruto as he softly pushed her away. Once the air nomad was at a small distance away from him, without warning, launched himself at Kiyoshi with blinding speed, shocking her as he grabbed her by the throat and slammed her against the stoned wall and lifted her up with one hand only. Looking directly at his eyes, the former avatar felt a small tinge of fear as he glared at her with murderous intent. I don't need a fucking lecture from someone who doesn't understand the turmoil I'm going through, so I would watch out with what I say if I were you, threatened Naruto coldly as he glared at her with fury. Roku slowly walked beside Naruto and gently placed a hand on the blonde's shoulder. She doesn't mean what she said, but we have more urgent things to worry about. Naruto kept glaring at Kiyoshi before abruptly letting her go and turned towards Roku. Why is there war after many years when I eradicated the thoughts of war? I thought the Avatar was supposed to maintain the balance between the nations. Where was he or she when the first risings of war commenced? Said the blonde as blue glared into amber eyes. Tell me everything. Sighing, Roku waved his hand lazily and the scenery began to change. A younger yet aged Roku arguing with the Fire Lord of that time about the Fire Nation invading and colonizing lands and villages from other nations and ordering him to seize at once. Watching from afar, Roku and Naruto watched as everything took place. Back then, Fire Lord Sozin had planned a massive invasion over the rest nations in secret, and first approached me about it after I had come back home from my training trip to master the rest of the elements. But I refused to be part of his plan as it would disturb the balance of the world, and that left a bitter pill for Sozin to swallow. But still, Sozin went on with his plan of world domination. Later years, I confronted him to stop at once, but sadly, it ended in confrontation with the promise of ending his life, something I regret severely, for I later found out that Sozin had been long dead, stated Roku as he slowly closed his eyes, and Naruto just looked at Roku with surprise. Dead? But I see him standing there. How he can be dead unless, asked Naruto till realization slowly began to sip in his mind. An illusion, an answer to which the former reincarnation nodded his head, and again waved his hand, changing the scenery once again to that of a volcano in the background, standing a few feet away from Roku as he laid on the ground with black fire burning on his chest, with the Fire Lord having his fist shot out with black flames dancing around it, shocking the blonde much. Black flames. But there was only one Uchiha that had such a degree of control over the black flames of hell, thought the Crimson Avatar while he continued to watch with anticipation as Roku looked at the Fire Lord in shock, and then it happened, shocking Naruto even further as Sozin's appearance began to disperse, revealing a person he thought to be long dead stood there, with his raven hair flowing in the wind, red eyes with tomos around the iris glaring at Roku. Sasuke, muttered Naruto. I had hoped on your return, that you would not make the same foolish mistake your friend made, but yet again, I was proved wrong as you opposed me, defeating me without effort despite my power, but that was my mistake since I underestimated you, for you're not just the Avatar, but a direct descendant of him and his bastard offspring as well, finished the raven-haired man with a snarl as he glared hatefully at Roku. But with you gone, all my plans are going to be realized. I have a vision for the future, Roku, with me being its sole ruler, finished the raven-haired impostor as his dragon landed behind him, waiting for his master to mount him. Naruto just kept watching till Sasuke mounted his dragon and flew away into the distance, and then everything disintegrated as it went back to normal as they stood again at the same rocky terrain. I take it that you know the man that started the war. It was more of a statement than a question, a statement that Naruto nodded his head slowly. Yes, I do. He threatened to engulf the lands into another sea of blood in order to quench his thirst for power and revenge, said Naruto as he slowly closed his eyes, taking a pause before continuing his story, but I assumed that he died long ago. But as you can see, he is very much alive and ruling over the Fire Nation while he is waging war for the past century and is nearing victory, said Roku as he stared at Naruto seriously, and as for why the Avatar did nothing, only he can answer you, finished Roku, with the rest of the previous avatars standing behind him. And the reigning Avatar doesn't stand a chance against him. Only you have the power to stop him and end this bloody war, just as you did many years ago, said Yanshin as she stepped forward. So we ask of you, Avatar of 4 dragons, will you lend us your power once again, pleaded Avatar Karuk. Naruto just stood there quietly, not believing that Sasuke was still alive, slowly opened his eyes and turned towards the 4 precious avatars with a stony expression. I'll help you, was his answer. Nodding his thanks, Roku signaled for his trusted dragon to come forth, and did so as the dragon landed next to Roku. Fang will return you to your body in order to return to the world of the living. Just simply nodding his head walked towards the dragon, causing Roku to worry, for he could feel the depression growing within him as he watched Naruto carefully mounting the dragon. Avatar Naruto, the blonde turned back at Roku. Don't let the loss of your family cloud your judgment and cause your demise, wisely advised the Avatar, but the blonde just simply turned around. Once he felt comfortable sitting on the dragon's back, he gently petted the dragon and it took off into the air. Back at the village of the Southern Water Tribe, the villagers still maintained their distance from the blonde teen as the fire had not yet receded as it still danced around him, not wanting to be burnt to ash just like the captain of Navy. However, the same little girl that was sad over Aang's departure wiggled out of her mom's arms with ease as she was preoccupied watching the fire, scaring her as she saw her daughter head straight into the fire. Shayna! Shouted the mother, but only gasped in shock as the girl entered the flames and wasn't burnt at all. The little girl kept walking towards Naruto till she stood in front of his kneeling form with his arms still stretched out. Curious and worried, the little girl approached him and gently placed her tiny hands on his arm and began to shake him, as if trying to wake him up. Mister, can you hear me? Please wake up, said the little girl as she didn't notice the same dragon that took Naruto dive from above towards the ground with the blonde clashing with his own body as his spirit was put back on his body. Once back on his body, the blonde avatar took a deep breath and exhaled the air he consumed, extinguishing the white flames completely while his markings stopped their glow and receded back into nothingness. Opening his eyes, Naruto noticed the little girl from before and gave her a small smile before he stood up and turned towards the villagers and walked towards their direction with his sights set on Kanna till he finally stood almost in front of her. Elder, I need you to tell where the current is Avatar headed towards, said Naruto to Gran while she simply nodded her head. He is heading up north, where our sister tribe resides, in order to learn and master waterbending, she informed him, and Naruto just simply bowed in respect. I thank you, Elder, Naruto said politely before he turned back towards the entrance of the village and began to head course towards the North Pole. Wait, Gran called out, causing the blonde to look back at her. Let us at least repay you for saving us by helping you prepare for your journey. It is a long road ahead of you and you need at least a canoe in order to make across this cold waters. Smiling a bit, he accepted and walked back towards the village to rest up for the day and prepares to leave the next day. The following day, Naruto now stood again at the edge of the ice with a canoe roped to the ground, carrying supplies for his journey, as he stared at the group of villagers that had come to see his departure. With Kanna stepping forward with a few more extra items at hand. Here, you will need this, she said as she handed him a small bundle to him. It contains a map of the landscape of the 4 nations and the location of the Northern Water Tribe, and a letter to my grandchildren with a new set of clothing, she explained. Naruto just nodded his head in gratitude, and looked at the rest of the people. I'm forever indebted to your gratitude. I promise to repay y'all somehow once the war is over, he finished saying before he swiftly jumped into the canoe without rocking it much and placed the small bundle next to the supplies and untied the canoe as he was getting ready to sail, but not before approached him once again. "Avatar, I have one favor to ask of you," the elder said to him. "Please, watch over my grandchildren when you find them. They're all that I've left of my daughter and I can't bear the thought of losing them," pleaded Katara's grandmother with small tears forming in her eyes. Naruto just simply reached with both his arms and gently wrapped them around her, whispering in her ear, "I promise to take good care of them, Gran. It's a promise of a lifetime," and with that he let go of her and used his foot to push himself offshore, waving goodbye to the villagers as he drifted away. Once he was at a good distance away, Naruto turned towards the horizon and kneeled down with his arms stretched out with opened palms till he stood up and brought his arms forward, bending the water to rise as a small tidal wave for him to be pushed at high speeds towards Earth Kingdom territory. Watching from a distance, Gran saw the Crimson Avatar get further and further away, hope dwelling in her heart with a certain thought in her mind. "It is not placed to have told you, but yours and my granddaughter's destinies were intertwined long before you had awakened. With each other, both of you will be able to heal and fill the holes you both hold inside your hearts in order to find happiness," thought Kana as she closed her eyes as she turned back to walk back inside the village with the rest of her people, awaiting for the day that the war would over. TBC, and cut. Sorry to have you folks waiting for the next update, but you guys know how hard it is when you have work and school at the same time. It's not easy, but alas, here's the latest chapter of the series. Hope you guys enjoyed it and R. Book 1 Chapter 4 first. I would like to apologize for taking long on updating the story, i.e. But lately, I have been having trouble with, whenever I tried to edit any of my stories. But thankfully, that problem seems to have been resolved. Also, glad to see that reviews are still coming, and to those that are wondering how Naruto came to gain his bending abilities or as to how Udon became blind or what happened to Naruto's son, well, everything will be explained later on through the story. But I will try to leave a couple of hints here and there to have you folks guessing. I know, I'm evil lol. But I will give you guys one hint: Aang will meet Raisin, don't know when or how, but they will meet and his story will be told. Also, I'm going to skip through some the episodes of Atla Book 1 since they are not as important, but I will give a timeline in cases I do make some changes and or point out which episodes stay as canon, and hopefully you guys won't get confused. One more thing before we hit the chapter: Azula will have a change of heart, but that's all I'm going to say to those that are curious as to what role I have in stored for her, so everyone will just have to read the story and find out. Explanation at the end of the chapter every time this is posted. Disclaimers. I don't own Naruto or Avatar. The Last Airbender Avatar timeline. Episode, Warriors of Kyoshi, stays as canon. Episode, King of Omashu, stays as canon. Episode, The Waterbending Scroll, will come before the Winter Solstice episodes. Episode, Imprisoned, Naruto will be the one going instead of the Avatar gang. Both episodes, Winter Solstice, will stay as canon with just a slight modification when Aang talks to Roku at the second part of Winter Solstice. Explanation at the end of the chapter every time this is posted. Disclaimers. I don't own Naruto or Avatar. The Last Airbender. And now, on with the show. Water, Earth, Fire, Air. Long ago the four nations lived together in harmony, then everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Only the Avatar, master of all four elements, could stop them, but when the world needed him most, he vanished. 100 years passed and my brother and I discovered the new Avatar. An airbender named Aang, but unknown to us, the Avatar of legend, a man named Naruto, had reawakened. And although Aang's airbending skills are amazing and Naruto may be the Crimson Avatar, they both have a lot to learn before they're ready to save anyone. But, I believe Aang and Naruto can save the world. This is his story. Commencing of a journey. It had been almost 4 weeks since the Avatar and his friends had left the southern tribe and made their journey towards the North Pole, but not before making a few pit stops along the way. Looking for a short break from their travels, their first stop was the Earth Kingdom's Kyoshi Island, where Aang brings the gang to the island on order to ride Elephant Koi, large fish who inhabits the surrounding waters, without realizing that there was a bigger fish under the sea prowling at its prey, as it tried to make a meal out of Aang, but he managed to escape without harm. Before they were able to leave, the gang was captured by a group of female warriors who live on the island. Believing that they were Fire Nation spies, Aang was able to convince them to trust him by using airbending, for Kyoshi was a past avatar and he is the current avatar. In the meanwhile, Sokka was taught a lesson in humility and equality by the Kyoshi warrior Suki, who trains him after giving him a humiliating defeat and manages to change his sexist attitude while Aang lets the village's reverence of him go to his head. Unfortunately, Zuko hears the rumors of the Avatar being on Kyoshi Island and catches up to them, causing mayhem as the scarred Fire Prince burns, causing Aang to feel guilty as he saw the damage that was done to the village until the group draws him off the island. After they left the island of Kyoshi, the group's next stop on their trip around the world was the Earth Kingdom city of Omashu. There, Aang, disguised as an old man, shows Katara and Sokka the Omashu chute mail delivery system, which he and his friend Bumi used to ride for fun 100 years ago. The trio gives the chutes a try but runs into trouble after it destroys a cabbage merchant's cart. Put in front of the crazy king of the city, the gang is given a feast, to which the king suspects that Aang is the Avatar and throws him a piece of chicken to which Aang holds in mid-air using his bending skills. The old king puts him through 3 deadly challenges to test his skills, each hidden with a secret meaning, while holding his friends captive. After challenging the king and defeating him as the final challenge, Aang is forced to figure out the king's name, and based on the nature of the challenges, he realizes that the king is his old friend Bumi. Bumi informs Aang of what his task as the current Avatar entails and that hopefully, he would think like a mad genius in order to prevail on the hardships ahead of him. Meanwhile, at the naval port occupied by the Fire Nation, General Zhao stood looking out the window of his office, watching the sunset as it illuminated the sea, awaiting for the return of the fleet he had sent out to fetch the Avatar, but the problem was that they had left over 2 weeks ago, and no report hadn't come in, and it began to irritate him to no end as a scowl appeared in his face. "Where the hell are those imbeciles?" growled the general in displeasure, but then he turned towards his door frame as the sound of running footsteps got closer till a soldier appeared through the door, gasping for air as he used the door frame for support while he held a scroll in his hand. "General Zhao," gasped the soldier as he saluted his higher in command. "Sir, a messenger hawk just arrived, with grave news concerning the fleet." "And what news could it be besides they might have already captured the Avatar and be heading back to base," said the commander as he went back to admiring the sunset. "Commander Zhao, it's worse than that," said the nameless soldier. "The entire fleet was decimated by one man." "What?" shouted Zhao as he turned back in a snap and waltzed towards the soldier to snatch away the message from his hands and began to read what the letter contained. "General Zhao, by the time you get this message, our fleet would be no more. We found him. We found the Avatar. But dangerous he is, for he annihilated the captain's crew of 2 ships. I fear that we may have just signed the Fire Nation's death warrant. Mercilessly he is destroying the rest of the ships as I write this. We have awakened the sleeping dragon. Please, inform the Fire Lord of this threat." Growling in anger, Zhao gripped the paper till it crumbled in his hands, until he noticed that there was a second page on the back of the message. Separating both papers, he took notice that the second page was a drawing of someone, golden spiked-haired, 3 lines on each cheek with red eyes. "So this is the Avatar," thought the general as he glared at the drawing. Turning his attention back towards the soldier that brought him the letter, he barked his order. "I want you to post this flyer all over the nations. I want the Avatar to be found and captured, dead or alive," he said as he slammed the drawing in his desk, leaving it laying there, and the drawing slowly begins to become transparent, as it revealed the man of the picture at sea. The blonde Avatar could be seen on his raft, lying on his back lazily as he just dozed under the sun, letting the sea drift him off into who knows where. It has been a week since he left the southern water tribe village, and so far, he didn't know where to begin looking for. The lands had changed so much that he no longer recognized the land terrains from his time. "Damn it, I should have known not to leave in haste," thought the blonde as he sat up half sleepy. I don't even know how her grandchildren or the Avatar looks like for that matter. Hell, I don't know where they went to begin with or as to where the hell I'm. Man, what a drag, thought Naruto as he ran his hand through his hair in mild frustration till turned towards his left and saw the untouched bundle that the village elder had given him before he left. I had forgotten all about this, muttered the blonde as he reached for the package and placed it on top of his cross legs, unwrapping it as it revealed 2 scrolls, one big and one small. Some clothing, a map and small supply of food. Curious, reached and grabbed the scroll first as he unrolled it, revealing a painting of 2 teens, one being a dark-skinned girl, blue eyes, and dark brown hair. Some of her hair was pulled into a bun, as the rest was braided into a ponytail beneath it, while she held a soft smile on her face with her hands held together in front of her waist, causing the blonde's heart to slightly ache, for somehow the girl reminded him somewhat of his long-deceased wife. Then he noticed she was standing next to a equally dark-skinned young man that held a small arrogant smirk with his arms crossed in front of his chest, also adorning blue eyes but a shaved head save for a strip of brown hair pulled back in a small ponytail that took shape of a small pineapple, causing Naruto to remember his lazy friend with a sad smile on his face before he shook his head side to side, regaining back his focus back on his objective. So they must be her grandchildren, mused Naruto as he still looked at the painting. At least now I know how they look, and if I find them, I find the Avatar. Rolling the painting back into the scroll, Naruto then picked up the smaller scroll, only to find that it was addressed to her grandchildren. Shrugging it off, he turned his attention to the set of clothing that was folded with a small note attached to it. Picking it up, he began to read its contents. Avatar Namikaze. As a token of our gratitude, we knitted you a new set of clothes. To replace the tattered clothes you were wearing, Gran. Rereading the note twice, he looked at the black pile set of clothing that was still left untouched. Reaching for the piece of clothing as he stood up, he held it in front of him, revealing to be a black sleeveless vest with a turtleneck, high enough to cover the lower part of the face, and it was adorning green outlines around the edges of the shoulder sleeves and turtleneck. Putting the vest down, he reached for the second piece of clothing, revealing to be a set of black kung fu pants with a long yellow sash to go around the waist, and a pair of kung fu shoes. No orange, muttered the blonde. Then he looked down at his own clothing, or what was left of it, all tattered and torn, ready to fall apart. I guess I can't complain if they went through the trouble making this for me, and the style does look cool, smirked Naruto as he slowly put on the vest and began to change his clothing. Fully standing, Naruto walked towards the edge of the raft and looked at his reflection by using the water as a mirror, admiring how good the outfit fit him, and the sash wrapped around his waist, leaving some of it hanging over his lap. Doing a backflip, he landed in the middle of the raft and did some hung gar and tai chi forms, feeling comfortable as to how loose the outfit felt. They did a good job with this. I barely feel any restrictions on, yet it feels a little tight, muttered the blonde as he walked to where the forearms bracers were and lifted them up, strapping them on his wrist. But I feel like I'm missing something, thought the blonde till a light bulb lit up while he was massaging his wrist. I know, I'm missing a hat, but I'll worry about that later since I'm close to shore. And indeed he was close to shore as he saw a port not far from him, but decided to land ashore on the furthest port from the village. Once the raft reached the wooden platform, the blonde used a rope to tie down his raft so it wouldn't drift away. Once making sure his raft was tightly secure, Naruto went to grab his bag and placed over his shoulder. Once making sure he wasn't leaving anything behind, he walked off his raft and began to make way towards town. Looking around, he noticed that mostly thieves, mercenaries and pirates were owners of the shops around here, and had to admit, they did have some good quality items, bringing a thought to his mind. If I want to keep a low profile, I must not use my bending, especially fire bending, since that would get me in shitload of trouble in the other nations thanks to this fucking war, pondered the blonde as he softly stroked his chin while he continued to walk down the streets. But that would leave me with taijutsu only, and that would not help much if I'm outnumbered while they're carrying weapons. Then he looked at some of the shops that had weapons displayed out in the open and made his way towards one of the shops as he Walked inside. Once inside, he went straight at the wall that held the swords, analyzing them till his eyes caught sight of a certain blade. A longer than normal katana, whose blade was on the opposite side of the blade, while the dull part was where the blade it should be. A ray skin handle with dual bamboo pegs holding the handle together. On the blade, there were some words engraved. Thou shalt not be greedy, thou shalt not be afraid. A sakabato huh. This blade looks perfect, I don't have to worry about holding back, and by adding my wind affinity, I can make the dull part sharp when needed, thought Naruto as he kept staring at the blade while he reached out for it, but once his hand was a couple of centimeters away he could not shake off the feeling of something ominous coming from the blade. What the? Hey young lad, a gruff voice snapped him out of his thoughts as he looked towards the source of the voice, finding that it was an old weaponsmith that stood behind the counter had gained his attention. If I were you, I would not dare to purchase that blade, my boy, said the old man grimly. Raising an eyebrow, he walked towards the counter to talk to the old man. Let me guess, it's a cursed sword, correct? Raising his eyebrows in mild surprise, you knew? No, but I could feel something off coming from the blade, replied the blonde as he turned back looking at the blades. Nodding his head, the old took a sigh as he told about the blades. According to the tales, since the time of Qin the Great, every famous swordsman that used that reversed sword always ended up dead, said the old smith as he took out a pipe and inserted some tobacco in it before lighting a match, puffing from the tip to inhale the smoke, and to this date, there has been no one in this world who could wield it, finished the old man, exhaling the smoke from his lungs. That's interesting, muttered Naruto before he turned to the old man with a grin. I'll take it, shocking the old as he dropped the pipe from his mouth. Are you nuts? Haven't you listened to a word I have said? I can't sell them to you, for if you died then it would be my fault. Besides you cannot kill anyone with that, shouted the old geezer in disbelief as he watched the stupid blonde walk back towards the sword and dropped his bag, reaching for the reverse blade as he grasped it with his hand. The lunatic turned back at the old man again with the same grin. How about a deal then? Challenged the blonde. Let's try to see what is better between my luck and their curse, and chunked into the air, shocking the old man even more. If I lose, my destiny will end here, said Naruto with finality as he stretched both his arms out with his eyes closed. What are you doing? Do youwant to lose your arm? Shouted the old man with fear evident for the youngster. That sword is very sharp even if it's a reverse blade. And in slow motion, the sakabato came down as gravity took its course, getting closer towards the arm of the blonde avatar, but to the shocking surprise of the shop owner, the blade just danced around his arms without harming him or leaving a scratch on him, embedding itself into the wooden floor. After a long period of silence, Naruto just grinned, I'll take it, causing the old man to fall onto the ground in shock and watched as how the blonde just placed the blade into his bag, and was about to lift his bag till the old man got out of his stupor. Wait! Yelled the shop owner, gaining Naruto's full attention as he watched the owner go into the back, searching for something as he could hear the sounds of items being moved around, and after a few minutes later, he saw the old man walk out with a regular black sheath, and he just stared back confusedly. What is this? Asked Naruto. I want you to have it, that way you don't have to worry about stabbing yourself while carrying the blade on your bag, explained the man. Not only that, the merchant grabs the sheath and taps it against the wooden floor, causing a loud tapping noise when hitting the floor, surprising Naruto lightly. The sheath is made of a special metal that's light but hard as a diamond, perfect for use in case you lose or get the sword taken away to defend against bandits. Are you sure? Asked Naruto unsure, but the old man just simply nodded his head. I can't explain it, but you, my boy, I feel that you're gonna need them in the coming future, said the old geezer. Not sure as to what to say, Naruto just politely bowed in gratefulness and gave his thanks. He grabbed the sheath and placed the sword inside, making an audible click when placed. Placing the sword on his side under his sash, he picked up his bag and walked out of the store. Once outside, the blonde continued his merry way through town as he walked down the streets of the market, till he heard the whispers of a small group of traders while they were gathered around next to a stall that held cabbages. Curious as to what they were talking about, he walked towards them to get a better hearing. "Did you hear about the village that is being occupied by the Fire Nation?" said one of the merchants. "Another one? No place is safe from those monsters," cried out cabbage stand owner. "That's not even the worst part. I hear that they took every earthbender that resided in the village and no one knows where they were taken. Some believe that were killed off to stop the uprising of revolt against them," informs the same merchant, causing most of them to lower their heads in hopelessness. "But there's still hope, right? I mean, the Avatar has come back," said another merchant with hope laced on his voice. "The Avatar? Humph," scoffed an old merchant while he held a smoking pipe in his hand. "It's the Avatar's fault to begin with. If he hadn't disappeared 100 years ago and stopped this war from happening, we wouldn't be in this damned mess to begin with." "Excuse me, gentlemen," interrupted Naruto as he chose to step in, catching their attention as they turned towards him, "but I was wondering if you point out where this village is located at? And what business do you have there, boy?" asked the old man as he took a puff from his pipe, blowing some smoke at Naruto's face. "Fucking bastard," thought Naruto as he swatted away the smoke. "I'm just a wanderer that raids Fire Nation camps to help others, sir." "So, you're just a foolish daredevil, aren't ya, lad?" replied the old man, who shrugged his shoulders. "Oh well, it's your funeral, son." Pulling out a map from under his coat, he spread it out in front of Naruto, pointing out where they were located. "The trading village is located here. This is where we are located." Then pointing his finger down south from where he first pointed it, "The village that is being occupied by firebenders is located south of here, to a small dot that was close to the ocean. If you run fast you'll at the village in 3 days' time, laddie." Pulling out his own map, Naruto scribed down the points where Old Chain Smoker pointed it and put it away once he was finished. Turning to the old man, Naruto simply bowed in gratitude. "I appreciate your help, sir." "Watch out." A voice shot out suddenly out of nowhere, causing Naruto and the merchants to look back down the road, only to find 3 kids, 2 boys, 1 bald kid with a blue arrow and dark-skinned teen with blue eyes, with a young girl equally as dark skin with same shade of blue eyes, with a flying lemur running straight at them while being chased by some men. The merchants sidestepped to the sides as when the boys and the girl ran around the cabbage cart, while the bald kid just jumped through the small space of the cart and turned twirling his staff till he swatted it, causing a gust of wind to send the cart back crashing at the men that were chasing them. "My cabbages!" shouted the cabbage merchant. "This place is worse than Omashu." "That's them," thought Naruto in surprise as he saw them running away and turning at a corner. "Those are the kids from the painting." At this realization, the blonde quickly dashes after them by jumping to the roofs and ran in hopes of catching up to them before those men they were being chased by did first. Try to find them, he did, but just as easily, he lost them till he heard a shout and ran towards where it came, and landed on the roof as he stood at the edge, only to find the girl being held hostage by a guy holding a knife at her neck while the boys looked ready to surrender. Not letting it stand by, Naruto jumped onto the scene just as he landed between them. Aang, Sokka and Katara kept running from the pirates as they tried to lose them by outmaneuvering them through the trading market, but persistent they were as a few were still hot on their tail. "Just wait till we catch the lot of you runts. Thieves. You won't get away." "Who are you calling a thief, you thief?" shouted Sokka back as he kept on running. "All of this for a stupid water scroll." "Shut up and keep running," shouted Aang as he still maintained haste with Katara following in tow. Looking ahead of the streets, Aang saw another corner to turn it and to hopefully loose them once and for all. Turning sharply, almost skidding, Aang ran down the alley with Sokka and Katara following suit, but unfortunately, Aang didn't count on the alley being a dead end as he and his group came to a sudden halt. "It's a dead end!" exclaimed Katara in panic. "Let's turn back," said Sokka as he turned backwards, but again, came a to stop one the pirates finally had caught to them, chuckling as they entrapped them inside the alley. "Heh heh, nowhere to run now, runts," sneered the pirate with long black hair with a light green bandana around his head. Aang jumped in front of his friends with his staff being held in a defensive position, ready to use his airbending to get out of this mess. Too bad they didn't notice one of the pirates that was sneaking behind them from the rooftop as he landed quietly and took Katara hostage, causing her to shout in surprise, causing Aang and Sokka to look back, as she was being held close as he held a knife at her neck. With the intent of slicing it open, "Katara!" shouted Sokka frantically, pulling out his boomerang ready to throw it at him while Aang was ready to spring into action, but stopped at once when they saw a small trickle of blood running down her neck as the pirate had pressed the blade a little harder against her skin, slightly cutting it open. I wouldn't try anything if I were you boys," warned the pirate. "Now, drop your weapons and surrender peacefully, and the girl won't suffer a painful end," offered the pirate, causing both boys to grit their teeth in anger, but couldn't do anything about it for they would hurt Katara. Having no other alternative, both of them were about to announce their surrender till a black blur landed in front of them, revealing to be kneeling man with gold hair holding a traveling bag over his shoulder with a sword strapped on his side, wearing a black sleeveless vest with color-matching pants, glaring dangerously at the pirate as he stood up. "I suggest that you let her go and walk away while you and your comrades are still able to walk," warned the stranger as he softly let his bag drop beside him and pulled out his sword, embedding it on the ground. "Don't interfere, this does not concern you," retorted the pirate, but the blonde just simply took a step forward, causing the pirate to get nervous as took a step backward with Katara in tow. "Stay where you are or the girl gets it." But it fell on deaf ears as Naruto took another step forward. Anxiety finally getting the best of him, the pirate twitched his arm, ready to slit her throat open just as Katara closed her eyes at the sudden twitch. But a twitch was all that Naruto needed as he blurred at the pirate, grabbing onto the pirate's hand, with his elbow pointing upward while he held Katara by the waist with his other arm up close, holding the limb tightly till the blonde just simply twisted his arm at a normal angle, breaking the elbow and fracturing the wrist at the same time, causing said pirate to scream in pain as he let go of Katara in order to hold his hand. But Naruto didn't let him do such as he pulled the injured pirate harshly towards him and with the same hand, shot a rapid straight punch at the pirate's face, breaking his nose as he sent him crashing at the wall, where he slid down and landed with a thud, making everyone look wide-eyed at the display of skill. With her eyes still shut, Katara awaited for death to claim her as the pirate was about to cut her throat open, but instead, she felt something snake around her waist gently carried with the sound of bones breaking just before she felt the blade being pulled away, followed by a loud scream and again bones being broken till it finally stopped as it hit the wall. Slowly, she opened her eyes and she saw the man that intervened holding her closely with his fist shot out. Looking back as to where his fist was pointing at, she saw the pirate that held her hostage unconscious on the floor, bleeding from the nose with his arm being bent at unnatural angle. "Are you all right?" she heard him ask, and turned to look at him, hard ocean blue eyes staring back her as she simply just nodded her head slowly. Shifting his attention from Katara, Naruto looked at Sokka, "Oi!" baldly. "Boomerang guy. Come over here." Hearing the nicknames the golden-haired stranger had given, both Aang and Sokka snapped out of their stupor and rushed towards them, not wanting to anger him.